Hey everyone, welcome back. We're building something peaceful in Minecraft while I tell you about someone who discovered a camera in their bathroom light, and it was their landlord's. Alright, before we jump in, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's been tuning in, commenting, liking, and sharing the videos. You guys are the heartbeat of this channel, and your support seriously keeps me going. Couldn't do it without you. So our first story takes us into the life of someone who thought they'd found the perfect apartment. Cheap rent, friendly landlord, everything seemed ideal. But when a flickering bathroom light led to unscrewing a fixture, what they found staring back at them changed everything. Let me tell you how a simple burned out bulb exposed a nightmare that had been running for years. I moved into this basement apartment about 6 months ago, and honestly, at first it felt like I'd hit the jackpot. The rent was almost too good to be true for the area, utilities were included, and my landlord Jeff seemed like one of those genuinely nice guys. You know the type. Always checking in, asking how I was settling in, offering to fix things before I even had to ask. He'd knock on my door every couple weeks just to see if everything was working okay. I thought I was lucky. I thought he actually cared about his tenants. Last week, my bathroom light started flickering. It was one of those annoying situations where it would strobe for a few seconds every time I flipped the switch, and I figured the bulb was just dying. No big deal. I'm not the kind of person who calls the landlord for every little thing. So I grabbed a step stool, unscrewed the light fixture, and reached up to twist out the old bulb. That's when I saw it. A tiny black lens, no bigger than a pencil eraser, embedded in the fixture and pointed directly at the shower. My entire body went cold. I'm talking full-on freeze response. My hands started shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the fixture. I stood there on that step stool for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds, just staring at this thing, trying to convince myself I was seeing it wrong. Maybe it was a sensor. Maybe it was some weird electrical component I didn't understand. But deep down, I knew exactly what it was. I got down, locked the bathroom door like that would somehow help, and just sat on the edge of the tub trying to process what I'd just found. Then it hit me. If there was one camera, there could be more. I went straight to my bedroom and looked up at the smoke detector on the ceiling. I'd never paid attention to it before. Why would I? It was just a smoke detector. I dragged a chair over, stood on it, and examined it closely. There was a tiny gap in the plastic casing, and when I angled my phone flashlight just right, I saw it. Another lens. That's when I called the police. I didn't call Jeff. I didn't text him asking questions. I went straight to 911 because every instinct in my body was screaming that this was so much worse than I wanted to believe. The dispatcher kept me on the line and told me not to touch anything else. Two officers showed up within 20 minutes and I showed them what I'd found. They called for backup and some kind of tech specialist. Within an hour, my apartment was full of people in uniforms and gloves. Dismantling light fixtures, air vents, outlets, they found 4 cameras total. 4. One in the bathroom light, one in the bedroom smoke detector, one hidden in a wall vent in the living room, and another in the kitchen cabinet above the sink. Every single one was actively recording, streaming to a server that was traced back to Jeff's house upstairs. The officer who explained it to me kept his voice calm and professional, but I could see the disgust on his face. He told me the footage went back years, not just my time there, years, previous tenants, all of it saved and organized by apartment unit. Then came the breaking point. They arrested Jeff that same night. I watched from my window as they walked him out in handcuffs, and here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. He looked back at my apartment, right at my window. And his face wasn't angry. It wasn't ashamed. He looked hurt, like I had done something wrong, like I'd betrayed him by finding his cameras and calling the cops. The officer standing with me saw my expression and said, "Yeah, they always play the victim." Turns out Jeff had been running an illegal voyeur site. He wasn't just recording us, he was selling the footage, charging people to watch tenants shower, change clothes, sleep, live our private lives. The detectives found hundreds of videos catalogued and uploaded. My face, my body, my most private moments had been broadcast to strangers on the internet for months. I felt violated in a way I didn't even have words for. The detective who took my statement tried to be reassuring. She told me they'd seized all the equipment, that the site had been taken down, that Jeff was facing serious charges, but she also said something that stuck with me. She said landlord horror stories like this were more common than most people realized, that there were whole forums dedicated to helping people check for hidden cameras in rentals. I had no idea. I'd never even thought to look. I'm still in therapy. It's been weeks since the arrest, and I still can't take a shower without checking every corner of the bathroom first. I moved out immediately, obviously, broke my lease and didn't care about losing my deposit. I couldn't stay there another night knowing what had happened in those rooms. My new place is on the third floor of a building with actual security and a management company. I check for cameras obsessively. I've bought detectors. I scan every room with my phone. My therapist says it's normal, that hypervigilance is part of the trauma response, but it doesn't feel normal. It feels exhausting. The worst part, and I mean this genuinely, is that he acted so concerned when the officers were leading him away. Like I was the one who'd broken some unspoken trust between us. Like he'd been doing me a favor by renting to me, and I'd repaid him by ruining his life. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. This man recorded me in my most vulnerable moments, sold that footage for profit, and somehow still managed to feel like the victim when he got caught. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because trust me, these stories only get wilder from here. The detective who took my statement told me landlord horror stories were more common than I'd think, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found when I started digging into Jeff's background online. Curiosity got the better of me a few days after the arrest. I wanted to know who this person really was. What kind of life does someone lead when they're secretly running a voyeur operation out of their rental property? I found his social media first. Normal stuff. Pictures of him at barbecues, posts about local sports teams, photos with his wife and kids. Yes, he had a family, a whole family living upstairs while he recorded tenants below. That realization made everything so much worse. His wife commented on his post with heart emojis. His kids called him the best dad. And the whole time, he was running this disgusting side business right under their noses. Or maybe they knew. I don't know which possibility is more horrifying. Then I found a Reddit thread from 2 years ago. A previous tenant had posted asking if anyone else had weird experiences with landlords in our area. She described Jeff perfectly, said he was overly friendly, always coming by unannounced, asking intrusive questions about her schedule. She said she always felt watched but could never prove anything. The comments told her she was paranoid, that she was being ungrateful for affordable rent, that she should just move if she was so uncomfortable. She deleted the post a week later. I wonder if she knows now that she was right all along. I reached out to her through a mutual contact. We met for coffee. She cried when I told her what I'd found. She said she'd felt crazy for years, that everyone in her life had told her she was overreacting, that Jeff was just a nice guy being a good landlord. She'd moved out because the feeling of being watched became unbearable, but she'd never had proof. Now she does. Now we both do. And honestly, I don't know if that makes it better or worse. The case is still ongoing. Jeff's lawyer is trying to argue that the cameras were for security purposes, that he had a right to monitor his property. It's absurd. There's no legal justification for hiding cameras in bathrooms and bedrooms. The prosecutor told me it's a common defense tactic, just throwing anything at the wall to see what sticks. But she also said the evidence is overwhelming. The recordings, the website, the financial transactions. He's not getting out of this. I still think about the moment I unscrewed that light fixture, how my whole life changed in the span of a few seconds, how something as mundane as replacing a light bulb revealed a nightmare I didn't know I was living. I think about all the times I walked around my apartment in a towel, or changed clothes, or had private conversations on the phone. All of it recorded, all of it sold. It makes me feel sick. People keep asking me if I'm angry. And I am. But more than that, I'm exhausted. Exhausted from looking over my shoulder. Exhausted from second-guessing every person who's nice to me. Exhausted from wondering how long I would have lived there if that light hadn't started flickering. 6 months? A year? 5 years? How much of my life would have been catalogued and monetized before I ever found out? The scariest part is how normal everything seemed. Jeff wasn't some creepy guy who set off alarm bells. He was friendly, helpful, the kind of landlord people recommend to their friends, and that's what keeps me up at night. Because if someone like him could hide something this horrific behind such a normal facade, Who else is out there doing the same thing? How many other tenants are living in apartments right now, completely unaware that they're being watched? I don't have answers. I just have this story and a reminder to always check your smoke detectors, check your light fixtures, check anywhere a camera could hide, because the alternative is living the way I did for 6 months, completely oblivious to the violation happening right above my head. Speaking of discovering things that were never meant for your eyes, our next story involves a wife who found something equally disturbing, except this time the betrayal came from inside her own marriage. I was cleaning out our attic when I found a shoebox hidden behind the insulation. It wasn't where anyone would accidentally stumble across it. Someone had wedged it deep, pushed it back into the corner where the roof meets the floor, covered it with old fiberglass that made my arms itch just looking at it. I almost didn't bother. I was up there looking for our Christmas decorations, not trying to unearth buried treasure or whatever this was supposed to be. But something about the box felt wrong. It was too deliberate, too hidden. So I pulled it out, dusted off the top, and opened it. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters. Not emails, not texts, actual letters, folded carefully. Some on nice stationery, some on notebook paper torn at the edges. They were all from my husband Marcus, every single one of them. And they were all addressed to someone named my dearest Elle. My stomach dropped before my brain even caught up. My sister's name is Laura. I didn't want to read them. Part of me wanted to shove the box back into the insulation and pretend I never found it, go downstairs and make dinner and live in blissful ignorance for the rest of my life. But I couldn't. My hands were already shaking as I unfolded the first letter. It was dated 3 years ago, before Marcus and I even got engaged. The words made me feel like I was going to throw up. He wrote about how much he missed her, how being apart from her was killing him, how he couldn't wait to see her again. He called her his soulmate. He said things to her that he'd never said to me, not even on our wedding day. I read another one, then another. Each letter was worse than the last. They detailed secret meetings at hotels I recognized, restaurants we'd been to as a family, even our lake house where we'd spent holidays together. Stolen moments, he called them. Promises of a future together. He told her he loved her in ways that made my entire marriage feel like a joke. The most recent letter was from 2 months ago. 2 months. We'd just celebrated our anniversary 2 months ago. He'd taken me to dinner, bought me flowers, told me I was the love of his life. And then he'd gone home and written a letter to my sister, telling her the exact same thing. The affair had been going on for 3 years. 3 years of lies, of family dinners where they sat across from each other and smiled like nothing was happening, of holidays where I probably took pictures of them standing next to each other while they shared some private joke I'd never understand. I felt like an idiot. I felt like everyone around me had been laughing at me this whole time, and I was too stupid to notice. I didn't confront Marcus first. I should have, maybe, but I couldn't. I couldn't look at him yet. I needed to know if this was real, if I was reading this right, if there was any chance I'd misunderstood. So I drove to Laura's house. She answered the door with a smile that died the second she saw my face. I held up the shoebox. I didn't even have to say anything. Her face went white and I knew it was all true. She tried to lie at first. She said she didn't know what I was talking about, that I was upset about something and taking it out on her, that I should calm down and we could talk about this rationally. But I wasn't interested in rational. I opened the box right there on her porch and pulled out a letter. I started reading it out loud, her voice, her name, his words. She broke down immediately, just crumpled, started sobbing, saying she was sorry, that she never meant for it to happen, that it just did. Here's where it gets absurd. She admitted everything. They'd been having an affair since my engagement party. My engagement party. The night Marcus proposed to me, my sister had apparently cornered him in the kitchen and told him she'd always had feelings for him, that she thought he was making a mistake. And instead of shutting it down, instead of telling me, instead of doing literally anything a decent human being would do, he told her he felt the same way. He said he was confused. He said his family had been pressuring him to settle down, and I was safe, reliable, the kind of woman they'd approve of. But Laura was the one he actually wanted. I felt like I was listening to someone describe a completely different version of my life. A version where I was just a placeholder, a checkbox on someone's list of things to accomplish before 30. Get engaged, check. Get married, check. Find someone boring enough that your parents won't ask questions, check. Meanwhile, the person you actually love is sitting at the reception watching you dance with your wife, waiting for you to get bored enough to come back. Laura told me that Marcus had been promising her for 3 years that he was going to leave me. He just needed to wait for the right time. His family wouldn't understand. There was never a good moment. He didn't want to hurt me, as if stringing me along for 3 years while sleeping with my sister was somehow the more compassionate option. He told her he only married me because his parents had already paid for the wedding, and backing out would have been too humiliating. He told her he was waiting for things to settle down, for me to get comfortable, and then he'd ask for a divorce and they could finally be together. She actually believed him. For 3 years, my sister sat across from me at family dinners and believed that one day my husband was going to leave me for her, and we'd all just move on like it was normal. I asked her if she felt bad. She said yes. She said she felt terrible, that she'd been losing sleep over it, that she wanted to tell me so many times but didn't know how. I asked her if she was going to stop. She paused. She actually paused, like she had to think about it. That's when I realized she had no intention of stopping. She thought this conversation was going to end with me walking away and letting them continue, like I'd just accepted my role as the woman who got in the way of their great love story. That's when everything unraveled. I told her I was done. Done with her, done with Marcus, done with all of it. I told her she could have him if she wanted him so badly, but she wasn't going to have him and keep her perfect little life intact. See, Laura was married too. Her husband Dan had no idea. He was a good guy. Worked long hours, trusted her completely. I told her I was going to tell him everything. She started begging, crying, saying I'd ruin her life, that Dan would leave her, that I was being cruel. I asked her if she thought about ruining my life when she was sleeping with my husband. She didn't have an answer for that. I went home and packed Marcus's things. Every single piece of clothing, every book, every random item he'd left lying around the house like he owned the place. I shoved it all into garbage bags and piled them in the driveway. Then I changed the locks. I didn't want to see him, didn't want to hear his excuses, didn't want to give him the chance to twist this into something where I was the bad guy for overreacting. He came home an hour later and called me from the front porch. I didn't answer. He started banging on the door, yelling that we needed to talk, that I was being irrational. I texted him a photo of the letters and told him to go stay with Laura, since she was apparently the love of his life. He stopped knocking. Then I called Dan. That was harder than I thought it would be. He was confused at first, thought maybe I was calling to invite them over for dinner or something. I told him he needed to sit down. I told him everything. I sent him copies of the letters, screenshots of text messages I'd found on Marcus's old phone that I'd dug out of a drawer. Dan didn't say much. He just thanked me for telling him and hung up. I found out later he filed for divorce the next day. I told my parents next. That was the worst part. My mum didn't believe me at first. She said I must have misunderstood, that Laura wouldn't do that, that Marcus was a good man and I was probably just stressed. I had to show her the letters. I had to watch her face change as she read them, watch her realize that her daughter had been lying to her for 3 years, that family dinners had been a performance, that everything she thought she knew about us was wrong. Mum hasn't spoken to Laura since. She's devastated. She keeps asking where she went wrong, like this is somehow her fault. Dad won't even say Laura's name. He refers to her as your sister when he's talking to me, like acknowledging her directly would make him too angry. Family gatherings are over. Holidays are going to be a nightmare. My brother is furious at Laura, but also furious at me for blowing everything up, like I should have just kept quiet and let them keep pretending. I filed for divorce a week later. Marcus tried to fight it at first, said we should go to counseling, that we could work through this. Work through what exactly? Work through the fact that he's been in love with my sister since before we got married. Work through the fact that I was his backup plan, his safe option, the woman he settled for because his parents approved. No thanks. He keeps calling, texting, showing up at places he knows I'll be. He says I misunderstood, that the letters were taken out of context, that he was confused and didn't know what he wanted, but he knows now, and he wants me. It's almost funny how quickly Laura stopped being his soulmate the second his life fell apart. Almost. Laura's been trying to reach out too. She sent me a long email about how sorry she is, how she made a mistake, how she wants to fix our relationship. She said she understands if I need time, but she hopes one day I can forgive her. I deleted it without finishing it. There's nothing she could say that would make this okay. She didn't make a mistake. She made a choice. Over and over again for 3 years, she chose to betray me. And Marcus chose to let her. The divorce should be finalized in a few months. I'm moving to a new place, somewhere neither of them know about. I'm starting over. It's terrifying and exhausting, and some days I don't want to get out of bed, but I'm doing it anyway. Because the alternative is staying in a life built on lies, and I've had enough of that to last me forever. They can have each other. I hope they're miserable. Betrayal from family cuts the deepest, but sometimes the person you trust most reveals their true colors in the most unexpected ways, like when technology accidentally exposes the lies they've been living. Tyler and I had been together for 2 years, 2 whole years of what I thought was building towards something real. We talked about moving in together, adopting a dog, maybe getting engaged next year. He'd met my parents, I'd met his. We had inside jokes, a shared Netflix account, plans for a vacation in the fall. I thought I knew him. I thought we were solid. Last month we were at my place watching some true crime documentary on my laptop. Tyler had logged into my iCloud once a few months back to download some photos we'd taken on a trip, and I guess neither of us ever logged him out. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? We trusted each other, or at least I trusted him. About halfway through the episode, a notification popped up on my screen. An iMessage from Tyler's phone to a group chat I didn't recognize. At first I thought it was a mistake, maybe a glitch. But then another message came through, and another. His phone was syncing to my laptop in real time. I glanced over at him. He was completely absorbed in the show, eating popcorn like nothing was wrong. I looked back at the screen. The group chat was called The Boys. Standard guy stuff, I figured. But then I read the actual messages. One of his friends had written, "Still with the backup plan?" I blinked. Backup plan? I kept reading. Tyler's response made my stomach drop. "Yeah, Jess is safe. Good job, Cooks, doesn't nag. But I'm not settling until I know it's really over with Amber." I read it again. And again. Jess. That was me. Safe. Good job. Doesn't nag. Backup plan. Amber was his ex-girlfriend. They'd broken up about 6 months before we started dating, and he'd always told me it ended badly, that she was toxic, that he was over it. I'd believed him. I'd never questioned it. My hands were shaking. I scrolled up in the chat, weeks and weeks of messages loading onto my screen. Tyler kept watching TV, completely oblivious. I felt like I was going to be sick. The messages went back months. They talked about Amber constantly, about how Tyler was still seeing her, how he was waiting to see if she'd take him back seriously, how I was just there in case things didn't work out with her. One of his friends even joked about it, saying something like, "Bro, you're really playing both sides, huh?" Tyler had responded with a laughing emoji and, "Gotta keep my options open." I was his safety net, his fallback, his backup plan. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my laptop across the room, but instead I just sat there, frozen, reading message after message that completely shattered everything I thought we had. There were texts about him meeting up with Amber, texts about how he told her he still loved her, texts about how he was only staying with me because it was comfortable and he didn't want to be alone while he figured things out with her. This feels like a deleted scene from a sitcom, except it's my actual life and I'm the punchline. I screenshotted everything, every single message. I sent them all to myself via email, just to make sure I had them saved somewhere he couldn't access. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Tyler still hadn't noticed. He laughed at something in the documentary and reached for more popcorn. I closed my laptop and took a breath. I needed to play this smart. If I confronted him right then, he'd just deny it, gaslight me, make me feel crazy. I'd seen enough Reddit stories to know how this went. So instead, I turned to him and said very calmly, "Hey, your phone is acting weird. I think it's syncing to my laptop or something." He looked over, mildly confused. "Oh, weird. Want me to log out?" "Yeah, probably a good idea," I said, smiling like nothing was wrong. He grabbed my laptop, logged out of iCloud, and handed it back. "There you go. Fixed." "Thanks, babe," I said. The word tasted like poison. We finished the episode. He kissed me goodnight and left around 11. The second the door closed behind him, I opened my laptop again and stared at the screenshots I'd saved. I didn't sleep that night. I read through everything again, looking for any possible explanation that wasn't what it obviously was. Maybe it was an old conversation. Maybe they were joking. Maybe I misunderstood. But no. The dates were recent. Some of the messages were from last week. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was exactly what it looked like. And here's where it gets absurd. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Tyler. "Morning, babe. Miss you already." I stared at it for a long time. Then I opened Instagram. I posted the screenshots, all of them. I didn't write a long caption. I didn't need to. I just posted them in a carousel, tagged Tyler, and added a simple caption. 2 years. I was the backup plan the whole time. Then I blocked him. Blocked him on Instagram, on my phone, on every platform we'd ever used to communicate. I blocked Amber too, just for good measure. And then I sat back and waited. Within an hour, my phone started blowing up. Not from Tyler, obviously, since I'd blocked him, but from his friends, the same ones from the group chat. They were furious, calling me psycho, telling me I had no right to post private messages, telling me I was trying to ruin his life. One of them literally texted me, "You're making Tyler look like a terrible person." I almost laughed. I didn't make Tyler look like anything. Tyler made himself look like a terrible person by being a terrible person. I didn't respond to any of them. I just let my phone buzz and buzz while I sat there feeling this weird mix of rage and relief. Rage because of what he'd done. Relief because I'd found out before I actually moved in with him. Before I wasted any more time. My friends started texting too, but their messages were different. Supportive, angry on my behalf. One of my best friends sent me a screenshot of Tyler's Instagram story. He'd posted some vague nonsense about crazy exes and privacy. I rolled my eyes so hard I almost saw my brain. You almost have to admire the audacity. He got caught and somehow I'm the villain for exposing it. By that afternoon, the post had blown up. Friends of friends were sharing it. People I barely knew were messaging me saying they'd been through something similar, that I did the right thing, that Tyler was trash. A few people defended him, said I should have handled it privately. But honestly, I didn't care. Then came the breaking point. Amber reached out. I don't know how she got my number, but she texted me that evening. At first, I thought she was going to yell at me too, but instead she said, "I had no idea he was still with you. He told me you guys broke up months ago." I sat there staring at that message for a solid minute. He'd lied to both of us. He told her we were done. He told me she was gone. He was juggling both of us and somehow thought he'd get away with it. Amber and I ended up talking on the phone for over an hour, comparing notes, figuring out the timeline, realizing just how much he'd lied to both of us. She was furious. I was furious. We were both furious. She ended things with him that night, sent him a long message telling him exactly what she thought of him, then blocked him too. I don't know what he said, and honestly, I don't care. The fallout has been messy. His friends are still mad at me. A few mutual friends have taken his side, saying I should have talked to him first instead of airing everything publicly. But most people get it. Most people see it for what it is. Tyler tried to make a new Instagram account to message me. I blocked that one too. He tried emailing, I sent it to spam. He even showed up at my apartment once, but I didn't answer the door. Eventually, he gave up. It's been a few weeks now and I'm still processing everything. Some days I'm angry. Some days I'm just sad. Sad that I wasted 2 years on someone who saw me as a placeholder. Sad that I trusted him when I shouldn't have. But mostly, I'm relieved. Relieved that I found out when I did. Relieved that I didn't move in with him. Relieved that I didn't waste any more time building a future with someone who was never planning to stay. They thought they were in control, but they set their own trap. And honestly, I'm glad I was there to watch it snap shut. I want to start by saying I've always considered myself a supportive partner. When Emma told me she wanted to start a podcast about relationships and mental health, I thought it was a great idea. She's always been articulate, passionate about helping people, and honestly, I was proud of her for wanting to put herself out there. So I did what any supportive boyfriend would do. I helped her research microphones, went with her to pick out equipment, even sat through her first few practice recordings to give feedback. I promoted her podcast to my friends, shared every episode on social media, and genuinely believed in what she was doing. For 6 months, everything seemed normal. She'd record episodes in our spare bedroom, talk about general relationship advice, interview guests occasionally. I'd listen to most of them while driving to work. It felt like we were building something together, even if it was technically her project. Then last Tuesday, my coworker Jason sent me a text during lunch. Just a link with the message, "Dude, is this about you?" I clicked it without thinking much of it. It was one of Emma's podcast episodes. The title made my stomach drop. How I Survived Emotional Abuse. I thought maybe she was interviewing someone, telling someone else's story. I put in my headphones and started listening right there in the break room. Within the first 2 minutes, I realized this wasn't an interview. This was Emma speaking directly to her audience, telling a deeply personal story about her, quote, narcissistic ex-boyfriend who manipulated her, controlled her friendships, and gaslit her constantly. Except here's the thing, we were still dating. We'd literally had breakfast together that morning. She'd kissed me goodbye before I left for work, and as I kept listening, my hand started shaking because the timeline she was describing matched our relationship perfectly. She used fake names, she called me Michael in the episode, but every single detail was unmistakable. She talked about how her boyfriend worked in accounting at a mid-size firm downtown. I'm an accountant at a mid-size firm downtown. She described a trip we took to Portland last spring, using the exact same Airbnb story I told my own friends about. She recounted arguments we'd had, word for word, except in her version, I was the villain in every single scenario. The time I asked her to maybe spend one weekend night at home instead of going out, which I'd framed as me being exhausted from a long work week, she described as me isolating her from her friends. The time I got frustrated because she'd promised to help me prepare for a big presentation and then forgot, she painted as me having an unhinged meltdown over nothing. I sat there in the break room, absolutely frozen, listening to my girlfriend describe me as emotionally abusive to tens of thousands of strangers, because apparently that's how many downloads her podcast was getting now. The comments section was even worse. Hundreds of people calling me a monster, saying things like, "I hope she got out safely," and "Men like this are everywhere." People were praising her bravery. Someone even said they'd gone through something similar, and her story gave them the courage to leave their own abusive relationship. Here's where it gets absurd. I went home that night trying to process what I'd just heard. Emma was in the kitchen making dinner like everything was completely normal. I asked her if we could talk. She smiled, asked if everything was okay. I pulled up the episode on my phone and just played it. Her face went blank for a second, then she laughed. Actually laughed. She said, "Oh, you found that one." Like I'd stumbled onto a surprise party she'd been planning. I asked her how she could possibly describe our relationship like that, how she could call me abusive when we were literally still together, still sharing a bed every night. And this is the part that still makes my blood boil. She said it was creative storytelling, that I was taking it too personally, that podcasts need compelling narratives, and she'd just been drawing from real experiences, but, quote, dramatizing them for effect. I asked her if she understood that people thought I was a real abuser, that her listeners were sending her messages of support for escaping me when I was standing right in front of her. She got defensive then, said I was proving her point by trying to control what she talked about on her own platform, that I was being manipulative by making her feel guilty for sharing her truth. Her truth. I couldn't even formulate a response to that. I just stared at her, realizing I had no idea who this person was. The arrogance was their downfall all along. Because Emma genuinely believed she could broadcast this to the world, and I'd just accepted as part of her creative process. She'd been building an entire brand off painting me as abusive, monetizing our relationship by turning me into a villain, and she thought I'd be okay with it because it was, quote, just a podcast. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there next to her, realizing that every argument we'd ever had, every vulnerable moment I'd shared, every time I'd been less than perfect, she'd apparently been cataloging it all as material. I thought about all the times she'd asked me weirdly specific questions about how I felt during disagreements, and I'd assumed she was just trying to communicate better. Turns out she was workshopping podcast content. The next morning I told her I was done. She looked genuinely shocked. Asked if I was seriously breaking up with her over a podcast episode. I said no, I was breaking up with her because she'd publicly slandered me to thousands of people and didn't see a problem with it, because she'd turned our private life into public entertainment without my consent, because when I confronted her about it, she gaslit me, which was ironic considering that was one of the things she'd accused me of doing to her. She started crying, saying I was abandoning her, that she needed me. I packed a bag and left, stayed at my brother's place while I figured out next steps. That's when things went from bad to unhinged, because Emma didn't just let me leave quietly. 2 days later, she posted a new podcast episode. This one was called When Toxic Men Can't Handle Accountability, and it was about me. Again. Except this time, she dropped the fake names and got more specific. She talked about how her, quote, emotionally abusive ex had broken up with her the moment she started speaking her truth publicly. How men like me can't stand being exposed. How I'd tried to silence her by threatening to leave. Her listeners ate it up. Within hours, people had figured out who I was. My Instagram, my LinkedIn, even my work email started getting messages. People calling me abusive, telling me I should be ashamed, saying they hoped I got what I deserved. Someone sent me a multi-paragraph message detailing why I was a textbook narcissist, based entirely on Emma's podcast descriptions. My best friend from college sent me a screenshot of a Facebook post where someone had shared my photo with a warning to other women to avoid me. This feels like a deleted scene from a sitcom, except it's my actual life and there's nothing funny about it. I consulted a lawyer about defamation. He said I had a case, especially since she'd now named me publicly, and the claims were demonstrably false, but that these things are complicated and expensive. He recommended sending a cease and desist first, so I did. Emma's response was to post about it on Instagram stories. She screenshot the letter, blurred out the legal firm's name, and captioned it, "When abusers try to use the legal system to intimidate their victims into silence." More harassment flooded in. My boss pulled me aside last Friday. He said he'd received some concerning emails about me and wanted to make sure everything was okay. I had to sit in his office and explain that my ex-girlfriend was running a smear campaign against me via her podcast and social media. He was understanding, said he didn't believe the allegations, but suggested I maybe keep a low profile until things died down. I'm being told to keep a low profile at my own job because my ex turned me into her content strategy. The worst part is that Emma genuinely seems to believe her own narrative now. She's posted multiple times about, quote, toxic men who can't handle being held accountable, about how she's receiving threats from men's rights activists, about how her ex is trying to destroy her platform because the truth makes him uncomfortable. She's positioned herself as this brave survivor, and I'm the villain who's trying to silence her. Her podcast has actually grown since all this started. She's gained thousands of new followers. People are calling her an inspiration. I've had to make all my social media private. I've stopped going to places we used to frequent together because I'm paranoid someone will recognize me and confront me. My friends have been supportive, but I can tell some of them wonder if maybe there's some truth to what she's saying. Because why would someone make all that up, right? That's the insidious part of it. Once someone publicly labels you as abusive, there's no real way to defend yourself without looking defensive, which just confirms the accusation in people's minds. Sometimes justice doesn't need a plan, just patience. At least that's what I'm telling myself, because right now I'm focusing on documenting everything, following my lawyer's advice, and waiting for Emma's lies to eventually catch up with her. A few of our mutual friends have started reaching out privately, saying they noticed inconsistencies in her stories, that they remember events differently than how she's describing them. Maybe the truth will surface eventually. Maybe people will realize she's been fabricating drama for content. But in the meantime, I'm the villain in someone else's story, broadcast to thousands of people who will never hear my side. And Emma gets to play the survivor, monetize the narrative, and build her brand off the wreckage of my reputation. She wanted a compelling story for her podcast. Guess she got one. Chris and I had been living together for 3 years. 3 years of shared mornings, inside jokes, plans for the future. We talked about getting a dog. We'd looked at bigger apartments. I thought we were building something real. Looking back now, I'm not even sure what we were building, but it definitely wasn't what I thought it was. One random Tuesday morning, Chris asked me to grab a file from his laptop while he was in the shower. He needed it for a work presentation and was running late. Simple request. I'd used his laptop before, no big deal. Except when I opened it, the screen was locked. I tried typing in what I thought was his password. Nothing. I tried a few variations based on our relationship, our anniversary, my name, his childhood dog. None of them worked. That's when I noticed a small yellow sticky note tucked under his keyboard. I pulled it out. Written in his handwriting was a password and a little reminder note to himself. The password read Vanessa 2019 with an exclamation point. Vanessa. His college ex-girlfriend, the one he'd dated for 2 years before we met, the one he said he was completely over, the one whose name apparently unlocked his entire digital life. I stared at that sticky note for a long moment, trying to convince myself there was some reasonable explanation. Maybe it was an old password he forgot to change. Maybe Vanessa was also the name of his childhood pet, or a favorite fictional character I didn't know about. But 2019 was the year they broke up. I knew that because he'd mentioned it once in passing during our first few months together. So unless this was some cosmic coincidence, his password was a direct reference to his ex and the year they split. I typed it in. The laptop unlocked immediately. I sat there staring at the desktop, and my stomach dropped. His background wasn't a photo of us. It wasn't some generic landscape or a cool piece of art. It was a photo of him and Vanessa from what looked like a beach vacation. She was laughing, he had his arm around her, and they both looked stupidly happy. The photo quality in their clothes made it clear this wasn't some ancient relic from a decade ago. This was recent. Well, recent-ish. Probably from 2019 or earlier, but still. Who keeps their ex as their desktop background when they're living with someone else? But that wasn't even the worst part. I heard the shower still running upstairs. I knew I had maybe 5 more minutes before he'd be out. Part of me wanted to close the laptop and pretend I hadn't seen anything, but another part of me, the part that was already spiraling, needed to know how deep this went. I opened his phone, which was sitting next to the laptop. Tried the same password. Vanessa 2019. It unlocked. I felt sick. I opened his banking app next, figuring he'd have something different there for security reasons. The password hint read, her special day. I tried Vanessa and her birthday, which I unfortunately remembered from when Chris had mentioned it years ago during some story about a party. August 24th, Vanessa_0824. It worked. At this point, my hands were shaking. I went back to his laptop and opened his email. The password manager auto-filled, but I checked the saved credentials out of morbid curiosity. Vanessa Worst Love, his streaming accounts, Vanessa and Me, his cloud storage, Vanessa Forever. Every single password was some variation of her name, their relationship, or something tied to her. It was like I'd stumbled into a shrine disguised as a normal person's device collection. I clicked through his files. He had folders organized by year. I opened the one labeled 2019. Hundreds of photos, all of them with Vanessa. Beach trips, dinner dates, Christmas morning. Her laughing in his kitchen, him kissing her forehead. Candid shots that felt so intimate, I felt like I was intruding on something private, which is insane because I was his girlfriend, and these were on his laptop in our shared apartment. Then I saw a folder labeled Future. My chest tightened. I opened it. Inside were documents. A house listing for a place about 30 minutes outside the city. Beautiful 4-bedroom craftsman with a big backyard. The listing was from late 2019. There were notes in a shared Google Doc between Chris and Vanessa, discussing which rooms would be what. She wanted the second bedroom as an office. He wanted to turn the basement into a home gym. They'd toured it together. They'd planned a life in that house. There were other files too. A draft email he'd never sent to her, dated 6 months after their breakup, begging her to reconsider. Telling her he'd made a mistake, that he'd change, that they were meant to be together. A folder of love notes she'd written him, all scanned and saved. Voice memos of her laughing at something he'd said. It was like walking through a museum dedicated to their relationship, and I was just some tourist who'd accidentally wandered into the wrong exhibit. I heard the shower turn off upstairs. I quickly closed everything and set his phone back down. My heart was pounding. I grabbed the file he'd originally asked for, some work presentation document, and just stood there in the kitchen holding his laptop, trying to figure out what I was even supposed to say. Chris came downstairs a few minutes later, towel around his waist, asking if I'd found the file. I told him I had. Then I asked him why his password was Vanessa 2019. His face went blank for a second. Then he laughed it off, said it was just an old password he'd never bothered changing. Muscle memory. Easier to keep the same ones than come up with new ones all the time. I asked about the desktop background, about the folders, about the house listing. His tone shifted. He got defensive, told me I was snooping, that I'd invaded his privacy, which, fair, I guess, but also he'd asked me to use his laptop. And his privacy was apparently a 3-year-long dedication to his ex-girlfriend. Here's where it gets absurd. He tried to tell me it was just nostalgia, that everyone keeps old photos, that the house listing was just something they'd looked at for fun, like a fantasy, that none of it meant anything. He said I was overreacting, that I was being insecure, that if I trusted him, I wouldn't be making this into a big deal. I asked him point blank if he was still in love with Vanessa. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. He said he cared about me, that we had a good thing, that he didn't want to throw it away over something from the past. Notice he didn't say no. He didn't say he wasn't in love with her. He just deflected. I told him I needed space. He asked what that meant. I said it meant I was leaving. He followed me around the apartment while I threw clothes into a bag, telling me I was being dramatic, that I was blowing things out of proportion, that every relationship has rough patches. I asked him if he seriously thought living in someone else's shadow for 3 years counted as a rough patch. He didn't have an answer for that. I stayed with my best friend that night, and the next night, and the next. Chris texted me constantly, long paragraphs about how much he missed me, how the apartment felt empty, how he was sorry I felt hurt, but I needed to understand that people can't just erase their pasts. Which, sure, but there's a difference between having a past and living in it. Then came the breaking point. About a week after I moved out, a mutual friend reached out. She'd seen Chris at a coffee shop with Vanessa. They were sitting close, talking intently. She wasn't sure if I knew they were back in touch, so she wanted to give me a heads up. I asked her when this was. She said yesterday. I checked Chris's text to me from yesterday. He'd told me he was working late and missed me and wanted to talk things through. I did some digging, asked around with other mutual friends. Turns out Chris had been trying to reconnect with Vanessa for months, maybe longer. He'd reached out to her shortly after we hit our 3-year mark. She'd been hesitant at first because, he was in a relationship. But he'd been persistent, told her he made a mistake letting her go, that he thought about her all the time, that he wanted another chance. The irony is almost funny. I'd been living with him, planning a future with him, thinking we were solid. And the entire time, I was apparently just filling space until he could convince his actual love of his life to take him back. The passwords weren't nostalgia. They were a declaration, a reminder to himself every single time he logged into anything that Vanessa was who he really wanted. I blocked his number after that, changed my own passwords, ironically enough, moved my stuff out while he was at work, left my key on the counter, and just walked away. He tried reaching out through friends, through social media, through email, always the same message. I was insecure. I didn't understand. I gave up too easily. He painted me as the bad guy in our breakup, which is rich coming from someone who literally built a digital shrine to another woman. Last I heard through the grapevine, Vanessa turned him down, told him she'd moved on and wasn't interested in rekindling anything. Apparently he didn't take it well. He's been texting me again, suddenly wanting to talk, saying he realizes now what he lost, that I was the one who really mattered, that he made a mistake. It's almost comical how their ego does all the heavy lifting. He had someone who loved him, who built a life with him, who was all in, and he threw it away chasing someone who didn't want him anymore. And now that she's rejected him again, he wants to come back to the safe option, the backup plan. Yeah, no thanks, I'm doing better now. Got my own place. Started therapy to work through the whole, was my entire relationship a lie thing, and I changed all my passwords to things that actually matter to me. None of them involve ex-boyfriends who couldn't let go of the past. Funny how that works. Living in someone else's shadow is exhausting, but our next story shows what happens when that shadow belongs to someone you'd never expect, and they're closer than you ever imagined. Rachel started going to the gym religiously about 8 months ago. At first I thought it was great. She'd always talked about wanting to get healthier, lose a few pounds, feel better about herself. So when she announced she was joining a gym and going every morning before work, I was nothing but supportive. I told her I was proud of her. I meant it. She'd leave the house around 5:30 in the morning, sometimes earlier. I'd still be half asleep when she'd kiss me goodbye and tell me she'd see me later. She'd come back around 7, shower, get ready for work, and head out again. She always looked happy when she came home from the gym, energized, glowing even. She talked about her gym buddy Sarah constantly. Sarah this, Sarah that. Sarah kept her motivated. Sarah showed her new workouts. Sarah was the reason she was sticking with it this time. I never met Sarah. Rachel said she was just someone she'd connected with at the gym, that they had similar schedules, and it made sense to work out together. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? My wife was getting healthy and making friends. That's a good thing, right? For 8 months, this was our routine. She went to the gym every morning. I went to work. We'd have dinner together most nights, watch TV, go to bed. Everything felt normal. Better than normal, actually. Rachel seemed happier, more confident. I thought the gym was changing her life. Then, one Saturday morning, I was driving to Home Depot to pick up some supplies for a project I was working on in the garage. I took the highway, the usual route, nothing special about it. And as I was passing the Sunrise Motel, this rundown place near the exit that always looks like it's one health inspection away from being condemned, I saw someone getting out of a car in the parking lot. I wouldn't have looked twice, except something about the person looked familiar. I slowed down, trying to get a better look. It was Rachel, my wife, getting out of a car I didn't recognize. A silver sedan, definitely not hers, definitely not mine. And then a man got out of the driver's side. I didn't recognize him either. He was tall, younger than me, wearing gym clothes. They walked toward one of the motel rooms together. He put his hand on her lower back as they went inside. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. For a second, I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe it was someone who just looked like her. But no, I knew my wife. That was Rachel. I pulled into the motel parking lot and parked a few spaces away from the silver sedan. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to go bang on the door, confront them right there. But another part of me, the part that was already starting to understand what this meant, told me to wait, to be sure, to get proof. So I waited. I sat in my car staring at that motel room door, feeling like I was going to be sick. I checked the time. It was 9:15 in the morning, on a Saturday. The day she told me she was going to the gym for a longer session because Sarah wanted to try a new class. 90 minutes later, the door opened. Rachel came out first, adjusting her hair, looking around the parking lot like she was checking to see if anyone was watching. The man came out behind her. They stood by his car for a minute, talking, and then he kissed her. Not a peck on the cheek, not a friendly goodbye. He kissed her the way you kiss someone you're sleeping with. I took photos. I don't even remember pulling out my phone, but I did. I took photos of them kissing, photos of him getting into his car, photos of her getting into hers. And then I followed her home. She beat me there by about 10 minutes. By the time I pulled into the driveway, she was already inside. I sat in my car for a moment, trying to figure out what I was going to say, how I was going to handle this. Then I just got out and walked in. She was in the kitchen pouring herself a glass of water, still in her gym clothes. She smiled when she saw me. "Hey babe, didn't expect you back so soon. How was Home Depot?" I didn't answer. I just stood there looking at her. She frowned. "Everything okay?" "How was the gym?" I asked. Her face lit up. "Great, Sarah really pushed me hard today. We tried this new HIIT class and I'm going to be so sore tomorrow, but it felt amazing." I pulled out my phone and opened the photos. I held it up so she could see. Her face went white, just completely drained of color. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. "Want to try that again?" I said, and here's where it gets absurd. She tried to lie. Even with the photos right there in front of her, she tried to lie. She said it was a misunderstanding, that he was a personal trainer she'd hired to help her with her form, that they'd gone to the motel because it was quiet and he needed a space to go over her nutrition plan, that the kiss was just him being friendly, that European people kiss differently, that I was reading too much into it. European people. This guy was about as European as a Chevy truck. I asked her his name. She hesitated, then said, "David." I asked her where Sarah was. She said Sarah couldn't make it today. I asked her if Sarah even existed. She didn't answer. That's when everything unraveled. I told her I was done listening to lies, that I knew exactly what I'd seen, that I had photos, timestamps, everything, and if she had even a shred of respect left for me, she'd tell me the truth. She started crying, big heaving sobs. She sat down at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands and just cried. And then, finally, she admitted it. There was no Sarah. There had never been a Sarah. It was always David. He worked at her office. They'd started talking at a work happy hour about 8 months ago. One thing led to another. They started meeting up in the mornings before work. The gym was just a cover story. 8 months. She'd been cheating on me for 8 months. Every single morning when she kissed me goodbye and told me she was going to work out with Sarah, she was actually meeting him at that motel. Every time she came home glowing and energized, it wasn't from exercise. Every time she talked about Sarah pushing her or motivating her or being such a good friend, she was talking about her affair. I asked her if she loved him. She said she didn't know. I asked her if she ever planned to tell me. She said she didn't know. I asked her if she was even sorry. She said yes, but I didn't believe her. She was sorry she got caught. That's different. I went upstairs and started packing. She followed me, still crying, begging me not to leave, saying we could work through this, that it was a mistake, that she'd end things with David and we could go to counseling and fix our marriage. I didn't even respond. I just kept packing. She grabbed my arm, tried to make me look at her. Please, she said, don't throw away 10 years over one mistake. One mistake. Like this was some one-time thing. Like she hadn't been lying to my face every single day for 8 months. Like she hadn't kissed me goodbye and then driven straight to another man. I pulled my arm away and told her I'd be staying at my brother's place, that she should find a lawyer because I was filing for divorce. She collapsed onto the bed, sobbing, saying I was overreacting, that I was being cruel, that marriages go through rough patches, and this didn't have to be the end. Imagine being this confidently wrong. She genuinely thought I was the one being unreasonable, that I should just forgive her and move on like nothing happened, that 10 years of marriage meant I owed her another chance, even though she'd spent the last 8 months actively betraying me every single morning. I left that night, stayed at my brother's place while I figured out next steps. He was furious on my behalf, wanted to track down David and confront him. I told him it wasn't worth it. David didn't owe me anything. Rachel did. I filed for divorce within a week, got a lawyer, started the paperwork, made it clear I wanted this done as quickly as possible. No reconciliation, no counseling, no second chances, just a clean break and an end to this nightmare. Rachel didn't take it well. She called constantly, sent long text messages about how much she loved me, how she'd made a terrible mistake, how she'd do anything to fix this. She showed up at my brother's place twice. The second time I threatened to get a restraining order if she didn't leave me alone. That finally got through to her. Then the messages shifted. She started getting angry, saying I was being stubborn and prideful, that I was throwing away our marriage over my ego, that if I really loved her, I'd be willing to forgive her. She actually said that my refusal to forgive her meant I didn't really love her. The mental gymnastics were Olympic level. Her family started reaching out too. Her mum called me, crying, begging me to reconsider. Her sister sent me a long email about how Rachel was devastated and everyone makes mistakes and marriage is about forgiveness. I didn't respond to any of them. This wasn't their business. This was between me and Rachel. And Rachel had made her choice 8 months ago when she decided another man was worth more than our marriage. The divorce should be finalized in a few months. We didn't have kids, thank God, so it's relatively straightforward. Just dividing assets, selling the house, going our separate ways. Rachel is still begging for another chance, still insisting this doesn't have to be the end. Still acting like I'm the bad guy for not forgiving her. But I'm done. Done with the lies, done with the manipulation, done with being treated like I'm unreasonable for having basic standards of loyalty and honesty. She didn't make one mistake. She made a choice. Over and over again, every single morning for 8 months. She chose him over me, and now I'm choosing myself. Sarah never existed. The gym was a lie. Our marriage was built on a foundation that crumbled the second I drove past that motel. And honestly, I'm glad I found out when I did. Better now than another 8 months from now. Better now than after kids or another decade of my life wasted on someone who didn't respect me enough to be faithful. They always show you who they are eventually. Rachel showed me, and I believed her. I was using Jake's laptop to print concert tickets when I accidentally opened the wrong folder. We were supposed to go see this band we both liked the following weekend, and my laptop was dead, so I grabbed his. He was in the shower. I'd used his computer plenty of times before. There was never any weirdness about it. We were engaged, we lived together, we shared everything. I clicked around looking for the downloads folder where the ticket confirmation was saved. That's when I saw a folder on his desktop labeled Wedding 2025. Made perfect sense. We were getting married in June. I figured it was where he'd been keeping track of his side of the planning. Maybe some ideas he wanted to run by me later. I almost didn't open it, but I was curious what he'd been working on, so I clicked. Inside were subfolders, dozens of them, organized meticulously: venue options, catering, guest list, dress ideas, budget, everything you'd expect from someone planning a wedding. Except every single file had a name attached to it, and that name wasn't mine. It was Megan. Megan's dress, Megan's venue, Megan's guest list, Megan's flowers, Megan's honeymoon. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Megan was Jake's co-worker. I'd met her once at a company holiday party. She seemed nice enough. We chatted briefly about her dog. That was the extent of our interaction. And now her name was plastered all over what appeared to be a complete wedding plan saved on my fiancé's laptop. I opened one of the documents. It was a venue contract, filled out but not yet signed. The bride and groom fields listed Jake and Megan. The date was July 2025. 1 month after our wedding was supposed to happen. I opened another file, a detailed budget spreadsheet, projected costs for everything from the photographer to the cake to the rehearsal dinner. At the bottom, a note in Jake's handwriting. Megan prefers destination, but budget might be tight. Discuss compromise. My hands were shaking. I opened a document titled Vows Draft. It was pages long. Beautiful, heartfelt vows about finding your person, about knowing from the first moment, about building a life together. He'd written about inside jokes I didn't recognize, references to moments they'd shared that I'd never heard about. There was a line that said, "You made me believe in love again when I thought I'd settled for comfort." Settled for comfort. I wondered if that was supposed to be me. There was a honeymoon itinerary. 2 weeks in Greece. The same place I'd told Jake I wanted to go for our honeymoon, but he'd said was too expensive. Apparently it wasn't too expensive for Megan. There were reservation confirmations, activity bookings, even a packing list. I heard the shower turn off upstairs. I didn't close the laptop. I just sat there, staring at files labeled with another woman's name, trying to piece together what I was looking at. The timeline didn't make sense. We'd been engaged for 8 months. How long had he been planning a separate wedding with his co-worker? What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. I grabbed Jake's phone from the nightstand. I knew his passcode. He'd never hidden it from me. Why would he? We trusted each other, or at least, I thought we did. I opened his messages and scrolled to Megan's name. The most recent text was from this morning. "Can't wait to see you today. Been thinking about the venue all night. I think the garden option is perfect." I scrolled up. Months of messages, flirty good mornings, late night conversations about their future, plans to meet up after work. He'd been texting her while sitting next to me on the couch, while we were having dinner, while I was showing him bridesmaid dress options for our wedding. I found the message where he'd proposed to her, 3 weeks after he proposed to me. He'd taken her to the same restaurant, used almost the same words, told her she was the love of his life. She'd said yes. They'd celebrated. He'd come home that night and kissed me goodnight like nothing had happened. There were messages about me. Megan had asked once if he was sure about going through with this. He'd replied that he was keeping his options open, that he needed to see which situation would work out better. Which situation? Like he was comparing job offers instead of planning to marry 2 different women. Jake came downstairs, towel around his waist, asking if I'd found the tickets. I turned the laptop screen toward him, asked him who Megan was. His face went white. He started stammering, saying it wasn't what it looked like. I asked him to explain what it looked like then, because from where I was sitting, it looked like he was engaged to 2 people and planning 2 weddings. He tried to downplay it, said he and Megan were just friends, that the wedding folder was a joke, something they'd put together as a hypothetical. I pulled up his text messages, read them out loud, the proposal, the venue discussions, the budget planning. His voice in his own words, calling her the love of his life. Then he got defensive, said I was invading his privacy, that I had no right to go through his things, that if I trusted him, this wouldn't be an issue. The absolute audacity of someone caught red-handed planning a secret wedding to blame the person who discovered it for snooping. I asked him point blank if he'd proposed to Megan. He hesitated, then admitted he had. Said it was complicated, that he cared about both of us, that he didn't know how to choose. I asked if Megan knew about me. He said no. She thought he was single. He'd been planning to break things off with one of us eventually. He just hadn't decided which one yet. Imagine being this confidently wrong. This man really thought he could juggle 2 engagements, 2 wedding plans, 2 entire futures, and just see which one felt better before committing. Like he was test driving cars. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just forwarded everything to myself. Every document, every photo, every message. Then I found Megan's contact info in his phone and sent her everything too. Attached a message introducing myself as Jake's fiancé and suggesting we talk. Jake panicked, started saying I was crazy, that I was ruining everything, that Megan would never understand. I told him that was kind of the point. He tried to grab his phone from me. I stepped back and told him if he touched me, I'd call the police. He backed off, started pleading instead, saying he'd made a mistake, that he chose me, that we could work through this. I asked him when exactly he'd decided he chose me. Was it when he proposed to Megan? When he planned a honeymoon with her? When he wrote vows about how she made him believe in love again? He didn't have an answer. My phone buzzed. It was Megan. She'd responded to my message, asked if we could meet. I said yes. Jake tried to stop me from leaving, said I was overreacting, that I needed to calm down and we'd talk about this rationally. I walked past him and drove to the coffee shop where Megan had suggested we meet. She was already there when I arrived. She looked as shell-shocked as I felt. We sat down and just stared at each other for a minute. Then she said, I had no idea. I believed her. We spent the next 2 hours comparing notes, matching up timelines, realizing how thoroughly he'd lied to both of us. And here's where it gets absurd. Megan had also been helping plan our wedding. Jake had told her his friend was getting married and needed advice. She'd given him vendor recommendations, helped him pick out cake flavors, offered to help with decorations. She'd been unknowingly contributing to the wedding I thought was mine, while simultaneously planning her own secret wedding to the same man. We decided to confront him together, showed up at the apartment that evening. Jake looked like he'd seen a ghost when he opened the door and saw both of us standing there. He tried to close the door. Megan wedged her foot in it. We walked in and just stood there, waiting for him to explain himself. He couldn't. He stuttered through half-formed excuses, said he never meant to hurt anyone, that things got out of hand, that he was confused. Megan asked him if he loved her. He said yes. She asked if he loved me. He said yes. I asked him if he understood that you can't marry 2 people. He called us both crazy, said we were ganging up on him, that we were misunderstanding the situation. Megan asked what situation we were misunderstanding. He said it was complicated, that we were making it a bigger deal than it needed to be, that if we just calmed down, he could explain. Neither of us wanted to hear his explanation. We'd already seen the evidence. There was nothing he could say that would make this make sense. We both left him that day, walked out of that apartment together and didn't look back. Blocked his number, cancelled the wedding, or, I guess, weddings plural. I lost my deposit on the venue, but honestly, it was worth it to not marry someone capable of this level of deception. Things went from bad to unhinged when Jake tried to salvage the situation by claiming we'd both somehow conspired against him. He told mutual friends that we were jealous of each other and made everything up, that he was the victim of 2 vindictive women. It might have worked, except we had screenshots, documents, proof of everything. Megan and I reported him to HR at his company. Turns out there were policies against romantic relationships that created conflicts of interest, and lying to co-workers definitely qualified. He was fired within a week. Last I heard, he'd moved back in with his parents and was telling everyone he'd been wrongfully terminated. Megan and I are actually friends now, which is weird but also kind of nice. We bonded over the shared experience of being engaged to the same man without knowing it. We joke sometimes about how we dodged a bullet. She's dating someone new now, someone honest. I'm taking time to just be single and figure out what I actually want. Jake's tried reaching out a few times, apologizing, saying he's changed, that he realizes now what he lost. Neither of us has responded. He had 2 women who loved him, who were ready to build futures with him, and he threw it all away because he couldn't decide which future he wanted more. Or maybe he wanted both and thought he was clever enough to pull it off. Either way, he ended up with neither. And honestly, that feels like exactly the ending he deserved. Double lives always crumble eventually, and speaking of plans that fell apart, our next story involves someone who discovered their entire relationship was being documented and judged by a third party. Lindsay and I had been going to couples therapy for 6 months. 6 months of sitting on an uncomfortable couch every Thursday evening, talking through our problems with a woman named Dr. Patricia, who had about a dozen degrees on her wall and a calming voice that made even our worst arguments sound manageable. We'd started going because of trust issues. I'd found some texts between Lindsay and her ex Derek that seemed a little too friendly, and when I brought it up, she'd accuse me of being controlling. So we agreed therapy might help us communicate better, work through the insecurity, figure out if we could move forward or if we were just dragging out the inevitable. Honestly, I thought it was going pretty well. Lindsay had been really engaged in the sessions. She took notes every single time, which I found encouraging. She'd sit there with this little leather notebook, writing down exercises Dr. Patricia suggested, things we needed to work on, observations about our communication patterns. I didn't take notes myself because I'm more of a mental processor, but I appreciated that she was putting in the effort. It made me feel like she actually cared about fixing things. One night last week, I came home from the gym and found her notebook sitting open on the kitchen counter. She was in the shower. I wasn't trying to snoop, but the page was right there, and I recognized Dr. Patricia's name at the top. I figured it was her notes from our last session. I was curious what she'd written down, maybe see if her takeaways matched mine. So I glanced at it. The handwriting wasn't hers. I blinked, looked closer. Definitely not Lindsay's handwriting. Hers is small and neat, almost print-like. This was loopy, messier, distinctly masculine. I felt this weird sinking feeling in my stomach. I picked up the notebook and started flipping through the pages. Every session was documented, all 6 months of therapy, but none of it was in Lindsay's handwriting. Every page was filled with notes in this other person's writing, and there were comments in the margins that made my blood run cold. Next to a paragraph about our communication issues, someone had written, "She's clearly over him." Next to notes about an argument we'd had about her staying out late, there was a scrawled comment that read, "He still doesn't get it." At the bottom of one page, underneath notes from a session about rebuilding trust, someone had written, "This won't last past summer." I flipped to the last page. There was a signature. "Love always, Derek," her ex-boyfriend. The same Derek whose texts had started this whole therapy journey in the first place. The same Derek she'd promised me was just a friend, that I had nothing to worry about, that I was being paranoid for even questioning. I stood there in the kitchen holding this notebook, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why did Derek have notes from our couples therapy sessions? Why was his handwriting in her notebook? And why was he commenting on our relationship like he was some kind of objective observer when he was very much not objective and definitely shouldn't have been observing anything? I heard the shower turn off upstairs. I opened Lindsay's laptop, which she'd left on the coffee table. I knew her password because we'd agreed to share them during therapy as a trust-building exercise. Ironic. I opened her messages and searched for Derek's name. What happened next, nobody saw it coming. There were hundreds of texts, going back months. She'd been messaging him after every single therapy session. Not just casual updates, detailed summaries of everything we'd discussed, everything I'd said, everything Dr. Patricia had recommended, and Derek was responding with advice, telling her what to say in the next session, coaching her on how to answer certain questions, suggesting ways to frame our issues to make me look like the problem. In one exchange from about 3 months ago, Lindsay had texted him, "He's still hung up on us talking. Dr. P asked if I've given him reason not to trust me. What should I say?" Derek's response, "Tell her he's insecure and it's affecting the relationship. Flip it back on him. You haven't done anything wrong." The next session, that's exactly what Lindsay had said. Word for word. I scrolled further back, found a message from Derek that said, "String him along until you figure out if you want me back. No point burning that bridge until you're sure." Lindsay had replied with a heart emoji. This was from 4 months ago, a week after we'd started therapy. I felt like I was going to throw up. Our entire therapeutic process had been a performance. Lindsay hadn't been working on our relationship. She'd been workshopping her responses with her ex-boyfriend, who was apparently waiting in the wings for her to decide whether she wanted to come back to him. And I'd been sitting there every Thursday, genuinely trying to be vulnerable and open and fix things, while she was treating it like some kind of strategic game. Lindsay came downstairs in her bathrobe, hair wrapped in a towel. She saw me holding her notebook and her face went pale. I asked her why Derek's handwriting was in her therapy notes. She froze, tried to say it wasn't what it looked like. I pulled up the text on her laptop and turned the screen toward her. Asked her to explain what it looked like then. Here's where it gets absurd. She tried to tell me Derek was just being supportive, that she'd been venting to him about our sessions because she needed someone to talk to, that the notes were because he'd offered to help her organize her thoughts, that I was twisting everything to make it seem worse than it was. I asked her about the message where he told her to string me along. She said that was taken out of context. I asked her what context made that okay. She didn't have an answer. I asked if Derek had been to the apartment. She hesitated, said yes a few times, but just as friends. They'd gotten coffee and then came back here to talk. I asked when. She said different times, usually when I was working late. I pointed out that she'd told me she was working late on those nights. She said she didn't think I'd understand if she told me the truth, that I'd overreact, like I was overreacting now. The audacity of it all was genuinely impressive in the worst way possible. She'd been lying for months, bringing her ex-boyfriend into our couple's therapy without my knowledge, letting him coach her through sessions that were supposed to be about us being honest with each other, and somehow I was the one overreacting by being upset about it. I told her I was done. She started crying, saying we could work through this, that we could talk to Dr. Patricia about it. I almost laughed. Talk to Dr. Patricia, the therapist whose professional guidance had been filtered through Lindsay's ex-boyfriend for half a year? Yeah, that seemed productive. I packed a bag and left that night. Stayed with my brother. Lindsay texted me constantly over the next few days. Long paragraphs about how she'd made a mistake, how she wanted to fix things, how Derek didn't mean anything to her. I didn't respond. But that wasn't even the worst part. A few days later, my brother mentioned seeing Lindsay's car parked outside Derek's apartment building. Multiple nights in a row, I checked with a mutual friend who lived in the same complex. They confirmed Derek and Lindsay had been spending a lot of time together. Apparently, Derek had been at her apartment multiple times when she'd claimed she was working late. Times that overlapped with our therapy sessions. Times when she was supposedly committed to working on our relationship. I decided Dr. Patricia deserved to know. I called her office and asked for a brief appointment, just me. She agreed, probably thought it was a solo session to process the breakup. When I sat down in her office, I told her everything, showed her the notebook with Derek's handwriting, showed her the text messages, explained that her client had been receiving coaching from a third party for the entire duration of our couple's therapy. Dr. Patricia looked horrified. She said this was a serious violation of the therapeutic process, that she couldn't continue seeing Lindsay as a client, that this undermined everything they'd been trying to accomplish. She apologized to me, said she wished I'd come forward sooner. I told her I'd only just found out. She told me something that stuck with me. She said therapy only works when both people are operating in good faith, that you can't build trust in a relationship when one person is actively working against the process, that sometimes people use therapy as a shield, a way to appear like they're trying while actually doing the opposite. That was exactly what Lindsay had done. She'd used our couple's therapy as cover, as proof that she was committed, that she was working on things, that I was the paranoid one for not trusting her. Meanwhile, she'd been running every session by her ex-boyfriend and following his playbook instead of actually engaging with the work. I found out later through mutual friends that Lindsay and Derek got back together officially about 2 weeks after I moved out, which means Dr. Patricia's prediction was right. It didn't last past summer. Except what didn't last was my relationship with Lindsay, not theirs. They'd probably been planning this the whole time. The wildest part is that Lindsay still tries to paint herself as the victim in all this. She told people I abandoned her when she needed support, that I gave up on us instead of fighting for the relationship, that I broke up with her over a misunderstanding. She conveniently left out the part where she'd been emotionally cheating with her ex and using our therapy sessions as material for their ongoing conversation about whether she should leave me. I'm doing okay now. Better than okay, actually. I'm seeing a different therapist just for myself, working through the trust issues this whole situation created. And I've learned that you can't fix a relationship when the other person is getting their script from someone who wants you to fail. Dr. Patricia was right. Therapy only works in good faith, and Lindsay ran out of that a long time ago. When the person you're trying to rebuild trust with is secretly undermining everything, it's devastating. But sometimes the real shock comes when you realize how long the deception has been going on. My brother Sam bought one of those Ancestry DNA kits for Christmas last year as a joke. You know the ones. Spit in a tube, mail it off, find out you're 3% Scandinavian or whatever. We all thought it would be funny to see our heritage break down. Maybe discover we had some distant cousin in Ireland or something. It was supposed to be a fun family activity. Harmless. Except it turned out to be the thing that blew our entire family apart. Sam's results came back first, about 6 weeks later. He opened the email at dinner, excited to share what he'd found. We were all gathered around the table, Mom had made pot roast, and everything felt normal. Sam pulled up the results on his phone and started scrolling through the ethnicity estimate. Mostly European, some Eastern European, a tiny bit of this and that. Standard stuff. Then he got to the DNA relatives section. That's where things got weird. The site matches you with other people who've taken the test and share your DNA. It's supposed to show you how you're related, what percentage of DNA you share, that kind of thing. Sam scrolled through his matches looking for us. Looking for me, our sister Rachel, our parents. Nothing. Not a single match to anyone in our immediate family. We were all sitting right there at the table, and according to this test, none of us were related to him. We laughed it off at first. Clearly the test was wrong. Maybe they mixed up his sample with someone else's. These companies process thousands of kits. Mistakes happen. Sam sent a message to customer support asking them to check. But something about it felt off. Mum got really quiet. Dad kept changing the subject every time we brought it up. I decided to take a test too, just to prove the first one was a fluke. If my results came back showing Sam as my brother, we'd know his test was just an error and we could all move on. So I ordered a kit, did the whole spit thing, sent it off, and waited. Those 6 weeks felt longer than they should have. I kept thinking about how quiet Mum had gotten, how Dad seemed almost relieved when we stopped talking about it at dinner. My results arrived on a Wednesday. I was at work when the email came through, but I waited until I got home to open it. I wanted Sam there. We sat in my living room, both of us staring at my laptop screen. I pulled up the DNA relatives section and my stomach dropped. Sam was right there in my matches, but not as a sibling. He was listed as a close family match, something like a half-sibling or cousin. We shared about 25% of our DNA, instead of the 50% we should have shared as full siblings. I scrolled down further. Our sister Rachel wasn't there either. Our parents weren't there. But there were other names I didn't recognize, people I'd never heard of who apparently shared significant amounts of DNA with me. And when I cross-referenced Sam's matches with mine, we had almost no overlap. We weren't just not full siblings, we were barely related at all. The reality of what this meant started sinking in, and neither of us knew what to say. We sat there for probably 20 minutes just staring at the screen, refreshing it like the results might change. They didn't. Finally, Sam said we needed to talk to our parents. I agreed, even though part of me wanted to pretend we'd never taken these tests. Ignorance had been working fine for 30 years. Why ruin it now? We drove to our parents' house that night. Didn't call ahead, didn't give them warning. We just showed up, walked into the living room where they were watching TV, and told them we needed to talk. Dad tried to deflect, said it was late, and whatever it was could wait till the weekend. But Mom looked at us and she knew. I could see it in her face. She knew exactly why we were there. Sam pulled up both our results on his phone. He showed them the percentages, the lack of matches between us, the way our DNA proved we weren't who we'd been told we were our entire lives. And then we waited. The silence in that room felt like it lasted forever. Finally, Dad turned off the TV and Mum started crying. That's when everything unraveled. They admitted the truth, all of it. I wasn't Dad's biological son. I was the result of an affair he'd had with a co-worker 30 years ago. Her name was Patricia. They'd had a brief relationship while Dad and Mum were going through a rough patch, and when Patricia got pregnant, she didn't want to raise a child alone. Dad convinced Mum to take me in, to raise me as their own, and they told everyone I was theirs. No one questioned it. Why would they? But here's where it gets absurd. Sam wasn't biologically related to Dad at all. He was from Mum's previous relationship, before she'd even met Dad. She'd gotten pregnant by her ex-boyfriend, a guy named Daniel, And when that relationship fell apart, she was already a few months along. She met Dad shortly after. They got serious quickly, and he agreed to raise Sam as his own son. They got married, played house, and pretended they'd built this family the traditional way. Rachel, our sister, was the only one who was actually both of theirs. The only legitimate child, as Mum put it, which was a terrible way to phrase it. Sam and I just sat there, trying to process what we were hearing. Our entire lives had been built on this foundation of lies. Every family photo, every holiday, every time someone said we looked like Dad or had Mum's smile, all of it was fiction. I asked why they never told us. Dad said they thought it was better this way, that we were a family regardless of biology, and telling us the truth would only complicate things. Mom said she was ashamed, that she didn't want us to think differently of her or of each other. They thought they were protecting us. Instead, they just set us up for this exact moment, where everything we thought we knew about ourselves turned out to be carefully constructed lies. The next few weeks were a disaster. Sam felt completely betrayed. He'd spent his whole life thinking Dad was his father, and now he had to process the fact that his actual biological father was some guy named Daniel, who Mom had dated decades ago, a guy who had no idea Sam even existed because Mom never told him about the pregnancy. I felt like an outsider in my own family. Every time I looked at Dad, I wondered about Patricia. Who was she? Did she ever think about me? Did she want to know me? And how was I supposed to reconcile the fact that the man I called Dad my entire life wasn't actually my father, while also recognizing that he'd raised me and been there for everything that mattered? Rachel didn't know how to process any of it. She was stuck in the middle, the only one who was actually related to both our parents the way she thought she was. She felt guilty, like somehow being the biological child made her complicit in the lie. Family dinners became unbearable. Nobody knew what to say. We'd sit there pushing food around our plates, avoiding eye contact, pretending everything was fine when it obviously wasn't. Things went from bad to unhinged when Patricia reached out. Somehow she'd found out about the DNA test, probably through mutual friends, or Dad finally telling her. She sent me a Facebook message saying she'd always wondered about me, that she respected the life Dad and Mum had built, but she'd love to meet me if I was open to it. I stared at that message for days, not knowing how to respond. This woman was my biological mother, but she was also a stranger. Did I owe her anything? Did I want to know her? Then Daniel reached out to Sam. Turns out Mom had contacted him to give him a heads up that Sam might come looking for answers. Daniel said he'd had no idea he had a son, that Mom never told him she was pregnant when they broke up. He wanted to meet Sam, to get to know him, to try to build some kind of relationship. Sam didn't know what to do with that. He was angry at Mom for keeping this secret from Daniel, angry at Dad for pretending to be his father while knowing he wasn't, angry at the whole situation. Our family tree wasn't just wrong, it was a carefully constructed fiction that had been maintained for 3 decades through deliberate lies and omissions. And now that it had fallen apart, none of us knew how to put the pieces back together, because the pieces didn't fit anymore. They never really had. I eventually met Patricia. It was awkward and emotional and complicated, but also kind of healing in a weird way. She answered questions I didn't even know I had. Sam met Daniel too, though that relationship has been rockier. Rachel is still processing everything, trying to figure out what this means for her relationship with all of us. Mum and Dad are still together somehow, but the dynamic has changed. The trust is gone. We all know now that they're capable of maintaining a massive lie for decades without flinching. What else might they be hiding? It's hard to feel secure in any relationship when the foundation of your first one turns out to be built on lies. Family gatherings are still weird. We're trying to figure out what we are to each other now. Sam and I aren't brothers in the biological sense, but we grew up together. We shared a childhood. Does DNA really change that? Some days I think it doesn't. Other days I look at him and feel like I'm looking at a stranger. The DNA test was supposed to be a fun Christmas gift, a silly way to learn about our ancestry. Instead, it revealed that our ancestry was a fiction, and the family we thought we belonged to was held together by secrets and lies. One spit test, 6 weeks, and everything we knew about ourselves unraveled. DNA doesn't lie, but people sure do, and sometimes those lies are hiding something far darker than anyone imagined. When Dad died, I was the one who had to handle everything. Mum was too devastated to think straight. and I'm the oldest, so it fell to me. I wrote his obituary, submitted it to the local paper, and scheduled the funeral for the following Saturday at the church where my parents got married. It was supposed to be a simple service: family, friends, co-workers, a celebration of a life well lived. My dad was a good man, or at least that's what I thought. 3 days before the funeral, I was at home sorting through Dad's things when someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find a woman I'd never seen before standing on my porch with two teenagers. She was maybe in her late 40s, blonde, tired looking. The kids looked uncomfortable, like they didn't want to be there. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Are you Daniel?" she said. "David's son?" I nodded, confused. "Yeah, who are you?" "I'm Patricia," she said. Her voice was shaking. "I'm your father's wife." I actually laughed. It was such a bizarre thing to say that my brain couldn't process it as anything other than a mistake. "I think you have the wrong person," I told her. "My mother is my father's wife." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is our marriage certificate," she said, handing it to me. "We got married in 1998. I took the paper, still convinced this was some kind of mix-up, but when I unfolded it, there it was: David Michael Harris and Patricia Ann Morrison. Married June 14th, 1998, in a courthouse 2 towns over. My dad's signature, official stamps, everything. My parents got married in 1995. I was at their wedding. I've seen their photos 1,000 times. "This doesn't make sense," I said, staring at the certificate. "My dad married my mom in 1995. This has to be fake." Patricia's face crumpled. "It's not fake," she said quietly. "These are his kids, James and Sophie. Your half-siblings." The two teenagers on my porch looked at me with the same confusion I was feeling. They clearly had no idea what was happening either. I let them in because I didn't know what else to do. We sat in my living room, this woman and these kids I'd never met, while she explained that my father had been living a double life for over 20 years. She had photos on her phone: Dad at their house, Dad at their kids' school events, Dad on family vacations, places I'd never been, moments I'd never witnessed. She said Dad told her he was a regional sales manager, which explained why he traveled so much. Except I knew Dad's actual job. He worked in insurance and did travel for work, but not as much as he apparently claimed to Patricia. The business trips he told my mom about were real. The business trips he told Patricia about were time with us. Patricia had seen Dad's obituary in the paper that morning. She recognized his name, his photo, the details of his life, except the obituary I wrote mentioned his wife Carol and his 3 children. Patricia's name wasn't anywhere in it. Neither were James or Sophie. "I thought maybe it was a different David Harris," she said, crying now. But then I saw the photo and I knew. I just knew. This is where patience finally snapped. I called my mom, told her she needed to come over immediately. When she arrived and saw Patricia sitting in our living room, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. Patricia stood up, still holding the marriage certificate. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I had no idea." My mom took one look at the paper and her legs gave out. I had to catch her before she hit the floor. The next hour was a blur of crying, shouting, disbelief. 2 women who'd both been married to the same man for over 2 decades, neither of them knowing the other existed. 2 families built on what we all thought was solid ground, now realizing the foundation was completely hollow. The funeral was 4 days away. We didn't cancel it. We didn't know what else to do. Patricia said she and her kids deserved to be there. Mom said it was her husband's funeral and Patricia had no right. I was stuck in the middle, trying to process the fact that I had half-siblings I'd never met, and my entire childhood was apparently a lie. Saturday came, both families showed up. You could feel the tension the second Patricia walked into the church with James and Sophie. People started whispering. My mom's side of the family had no idea who they were. Patricia's family didn't know us, and everyone was staring at each other, trying to figure out what was happening. The service was awkward. The pastor didn't know about the situation and gave a normal eulogy about Dad's dedication to his family. Singular, family. I watched my mom and Patricia sitting on opposite sides of the church, both of them crying, both of them mourning the same man who'd betrayed them both. Then we went to the cemetery. That's when things went from bad to unhinged. My mom and Patricia ended up standing next to each other at the graveside. Someone made a comment about Patricia being there. Mom snapped. She started yelling at Patricia, asking how dare she show up, how dare she claim to be Dad's wife when Mum had been married to him for 30 years. Patricia yelled back that she'd been married to him for 27 years, and she had just as much right to be there. They got into a screaming match right there at the cemetery, while the rest of us just stood around in shock. My uncle had to physically separate them. The pastor looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. It was a disaster, but that wasn't even the worst part. A week later, we met with Dad's lawyer to go over the will, except it turned out there were two wills, two separate legal documents filed with two different lawyers, two life insurance policies, two retirement accounts, two savings accounts. Dad had been splitting his assets, his time, his entire existence perfectly down the middle for over 20 years. The lawyer we met with had no idea about the other family. The other lawyer apparently had no idea about us. Dad had structured his entire financial life to maintain both households. He had a system, specific days he'd be with each family, specific stories he'd tell each wife about where he was, business trips, conferences, late meetings. It was all carefully planned. How does someone even do that? How do you wake up every day and lie to two separate families? How do you sit at two different dinner tables and pretend both lives are real? The logistics alone are insane, but he did it. For 20 years, he maintained two complete lives and nobody caught on. The financial chaos that followed was a nightmare. Both families were fighting over assets. Patricia's lawyer argued she had just as much claim to Dad's estate as my mum. My mum's lawyer argued that Dad's marriage to Patricia was invalid because he was already married. But then Patricia's lawyer pointed out that Dad committed bigamy, which meant both marriages might be legally questionable. Insurance companies didn't know which family to pay out. Banks froze accounts while they tried to sort out who had legal claim to what. I found out I have 4 half-siblings total, 2 from Patricia's family, 2 more from a third woman who came forward after seeing the obituary, a third family, a third marriage. This one only lasted a few years before Dad apparently called it off, but there were 2 kids from that relationship too. My father had been married 3 times, simultaneously, to 3 different women, with 7 children total, 3 families, 3 separate lives, 3 versions of the same man, all of them fake. Every memory I have of my dad is now tainted. Every family dinner, every birthday, every time he told me he loved me, I wonder if he was thinking about his other families, if he loved them more, if we were just one of his projects, something he maintained out of obligation rather than actual care. The legal battles are still ongoing. Mum and Patricia have both filed claims. The third wife is staying out of it, says she doesn't want anything to do with Dad's mess. My half-siblings and I have tried to connect, but it's weird. We're strangers bound together by the fact that our father lied to all of us. Some of them are angry. Some are in denial. Some just want to move on and pretend none of this happened. I'm somewhere in between, angry at Dad for destroying multiple families. Sad that the person I thought I knew never really existed. Confused about what any of it means. My entire childhood feels like a performance now. Was any of it real? Did he actually care about us? Or were we just part of the elaborate system he'd built to maintain his triple life? Mom hasn't left the house much since the funeral. She's humiliated. Her friends know. Her family knows. Everyone knows that her husband of 30 years had 2 other families. Patricia is apparently in therapy. The third wife moved to another state, and I'm left trying to figure out how to process the fact that my dad's entire life was a lie. They say you never really know someone. I used to think that was just something people said. Now I know it's true. I lived with my dad for 18 years. I thought I knew him. Turns out I didn't know him at all. None of us did. He was a stranger wearing a mask, and he wore it so well that nobody saw through it until he was gone. Some secrets die with the person who kept them, but others explode into the open at the worst possible moment, destroying everything they touch. After Grandma passed, we were cleaning out her house when I found a small camera hidden in her bedroom bookshelf. It was tucked behind some old hardcover novels she'd probably read 100 times, barely visible unless you were really looking. I almost missed it completely. I only noticed because I was pulling the books down to box them up, and the camera shifted, catching the light. It was one of those small security cameras, the kind people use for nanny cams or to keep an eye on their pets while they're at work. There was a wire running down the back of the shelf to a hard drive hidden in the cabinet below. The whole setup was deliberate, carefully concealed. I stood there holding this camera, trying to figure out why my grandmother would have been recording her own bedroom. My first thought was maybe she was worried about her health, wanted footage in case she had a fall or a medical emergency, and needed to show doctors what happened. She'd lived alone for the last 20 years, ever since Grandpa died. It would make sense for her to want some kind of safety measure. But something about the placement felt off. The camera wasn't angled toward the bed where she'd sleep, or the doorway where she'd enter. It was pointed at a chair in the corner of the room and the space in front of her dresser. I unplugged the hard drive and took it downstairs where my cousin Derek was sorting through kitchen boxes. I showed him what I'd found. He was just as confused as I was. We hooked the hard drive up to Derek's laptop and started going through the files. There were hundreds of hours of footage, maybe thousands, files dated back almost 2 years. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Grandma reading in her chair, Grandma folding laundry, Grandma watching television, Grandma sleeping, hours and hours of mundane, everyday life. We fast-forwarded through most of it, looking for anything unusual, any clue as to why she'd set this up. Then we found a video from 3 months before she died. The timestamp said it was recorded at night, around 10 p.m. Grandma was sitting in her chair, reading like usual. Then someone knocked on her bedroom door. She looked up, marked her page, and said, "Come in." The door opened and a man walked in. For a second, my heart stopped because I thought I was looking at my grandfather. Same height, same build, same way of walking. He was even wearing clothes I recognized from old photos. Grandpa's favorite cardigan, the green one with the leather patches on the elbows. Grandpa's glasses, but Grandpa had been dead since 2003. This was 2024. Derek grabbed my arm. "Is that—" he started but didn't finish, because we both realized at the same time it wasn't Grandpa. It was Uncle Ray, Grandpa's younger brother. They'd looked similar when they were younger, but age had made the resemblance even stronger, and Ray was deliberately dressed like his dead brother. We watched as Ray sat down on the edge of Grandma's bed. She didn't say anything, just watched him. He was quiet for a long moment, then he started talking, and what he said made my blood run cold. He confessed that he'd murdered Grandpa 20 years ago, said he'd made it look like a heart attack, that he'd researched methods for months, found a way to induce cardiac arrest that wouldn't show up in a standard autopsy. He described how he'd done it, when, where, details that made me feel sick, and then he said why. He'd been in love with Grandma, had been for decades apparently, since before she married his brother. He thought if Grandpa was gone, eventually she'd turn to him, that they'd end up together, but she never did. She mourned Grandpa, stayed faithful to his memory, and Ray spent 20 years living with what he'd done and having nothing to show for it. He told Grandma he couldn't live with the guilt anymore, that it was eating him alive, that he needed her to know the truth. He was crying by the end of it, saying he was sorry, that he'd ruined everything, that he understood if she hated him. But that wasn't even the worst part. Grandma just sat there, completely silent, through his entire confession. When he finally stopped talking, she looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "I know." Ray's head snapped up. "What?" "I've known for years," she said. Her voice was steady, calm. "I figured it out about 5 years after Thomas died. The details never quite added up. And you changed after he passed. Started coming around more, trying to take care of me, saying things that made me wonder. It took me a while, but eventually I put it together." Ray looked absolutely shattered. "Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you go to the police?" Grandma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because you're family. Because turning you in wouldn't bring Thomas back. Because our family had already lost enough." She paused. "And because I knew you were already living in your own prison." That seemed like punishment enough. She told him to leave and never come back. Said if she ever saw him again, she'd go to the police herself and tell them everything. Ray stood up, nodded, and walked out. Grandma waited until she heard the front door close. Then she sat there in her chair, staring at nothing, for almost an hour. She didn't cry, didn't call anyone, just sat there in silence. Derek and I watched the entire thing twice, trying to process what we'd just seen. Our grandfather hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been murdered by his own brother, and our grandmother had known for months, maybe years, and never told anyone. I wanted to pretend we never found the footage, delete it, smash the hard drive, Forget any of this happened. But Derek said we had to take it to the police, that Grandpa deserved justice, even if it came 20 years late. We argued about it for hours. Eventually, I realized he was right. We took the footage to the police the next day, handed over the hard drive, gave statements, explained where we'd found it. They said they'd look into it. I didn't really believe anything would come of it. How do you prove a murder that happened 2 decades ago, that was already ruled a death by natural causes? This is where patience finally snapped. Turns out the police took it very seriously. They reopened Grandpa's case, exhumed his body for a new autopsy with modern technology and techniques, and they found exactly what Ray had described: evidence of the substance he'd used, still detectable in bone marrow and tissue samples, evidence that had been missed in 2003 because no one was looking for it. They arrested Uncle Ray 3 weeks later. He didn't deny it. Apparently he'd been waiting for this for 20 years. He confessed to everything, gave a full statement, didn't even ask for a lawyer initially. The family found out through the news before the police could notify everyone. My phone started blowing up with calls and texts from relatives demanding to know what was happening. The fallout has been catastrophic. Half the family thinks Derek and I did the right thing. The other half thinks we should have left it alone, that we've destroyed the family by bringing this to light. Ray's kids aren't speaking to us. My aunt called me screaming, saying we'd ruined their lives. Some cousins have taken sides, stopped talking to each other. Family gatherings are impossible now, and I keep thinking about Grandma, about how she knew for months, maybe longer, and chose to stay silent. She could have gone to the police at any time after Ray confessed to her, but she didn't. She protected the family from this exact fallout, this exact pain. She chose to carry that burden alone rather than tear everyone apart. Part of me wonders if we made a mistake, if we should have honored her implicit decision to let sleeping dogs lie. She had the footage. She could have sent it to police herself before she died, but she didn't. Maybe that was intentional. Maybe she wanted the truth preserved but not pursued, a record for history rather than evidence for prosecution. But Grandpa was murdered. His own brother killed him and walked free for 20 years, sat at family dinners, attended weddings and funerals, pretended to mourn while knowing exactly what he'd done. How could we just ignore that? The trial is coming up soon. Ray's lawyer is trying to argue diminished capacity, that the guilt drove him mentally unstable, that he's suffered enough. I don't know if that'll work. I don't know if I even care. All I know is that our family is shattered. Grandma's final secret has destroyed the fragile peace she'd maintained. And I found all of this out from a camera hidden behind dusty books. Sometimes I wish I'd never pulled those books off the shelf, that I'd just packed them up without looking, let someone else find the camera years from now, or never at all. But Derek's probably right. Grandpa deserved justice, even if it came too late, even if it cost us everything. Grandma knew what this would do to the family. That's why she stayed silent. She chose to protect us from the truth, and we chose to expose it. I guess we'll find out eventually if we made the right call. Right now, it doesn't feel like it. When the dead leave behind evidence the living never expected, it changes everything. But our next story shows what happens when someone decides to create their own evidence of wrongdoing. I reported my manager Tom to HR for harassment after he cornered me in the supply room and made inappropriate comments. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't a misunderstanding. He'd blocked the doorway, stood way too close, and said things about my appearance that made my skin crawl. I'd tried to leave twice. He kept stepping in my way, smiling like it was all some joke I was supposed to be in on. When I finally pushed past him, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my coffee cup. I went straight to HR, filled out the formal complaint, described everything in detail. The HR director, a woman named Sandra, nodded sympathetically, took notes, and promised me they'd investigate thoroughly. She said I was brave for coming forward, that the company had a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of behavior, that I should feel safe at work. I actually believed her. A week later, Sandra called me back into her office. I thought maybe she was going to tell me Tom had been disciplined, maybe moved to a different department, something. Instead, she sat me down and said they'd completed their investigation. There was no evidence to support my claim. She suggested I might have misinterpreted the situation, that maybe Tom was just being friendly and I'd taken it the wrong way. She used the word misunderstand about 4 times in 2 minutes. I sat there stunned. I asked about the security camera. I knew for a fact there was one in the supply room because I'd noticed it dozens of times. Sandra said the footage was unavailable. Technical issues. The recording had been corrupted or overwritten or something. Very unfortunate timing. She said without evidence, it was my word against Tom's, and Tom had been with the company for 12 years. I'd been there 18 months. The implication was pretty clear. I left that meeting feeling sick, angry, helpless. I knew what had happened. I wasn't confused. I hadn't misinterpreted anything, and now I was being gaslit by the very people who were supposed to protect employees from exactly this kind of situation. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that camera, about how convenient it was that the footage was suddenly unavailable right when it would have proven my case. Something felt off, so I decided to do some digging. Our office building contracts with an outside security company for all the cameras and monitoring. I found their contact info online and called the next morning. I told them I worked in the building and had lost a necklace in the supply room the previous week. I asked if there was any way I could review the security footage to see if it had fallen somewhere. The guy I talked to was friendly, said it shouldn't be a problem, just needed to verify I was an employee and which date and time I needed. I gave him the details. He put me on hold for a few minutes. When he came back, he said he'd found the footage and could send me the file. Just like that. No corruption, no technical issues, no unavailable recording. He emailed it to me within the hour. I watched the video in my car during lunch break. My hands were shaking again, but this time from rage. The footage was crystal clear. Tom blocking the doorway, Tom touching my shoulder when I tried to move past him, Tom leaning in close while I visibly backed away. The audio was a little muffled, but you could hear him saying something that made me look uncomfortable, and him laughing. Everything I described in my complaint was right there on camera. Undeniable, exactly as I'd said. But that wasn't even the worst part. I scrubbed through more of the footage, checking the days after I'd filed my complaint, and that's when I found something that made everything click into place. 2 days after my meeting with Sandra, there was footage of the building's lobby bar. Tom and Sandra sitting together, having drinks, laughing, looking very friendly, very familiar. Not like a manager and an HR director discussing a serious harassment complaint. Like friends, maybe more than friends. I checked earlier dates, found more footage of them together. Coffee in the morning, lunch in the building cafeteria, drinks after work. They'd been spending time together for months. Sandra hadn't investigated my complaint objectively. She'd protected her friend. Maybe her relationship, I didn't know. But she'd definitely lied about the footage being unavailable. And she definitely dismissed my valid complaint to protect someone she had a personal connection to. I made copies of everything, the supply room footage, the bar footage, all of it. Then I sent it to the CEO, not Sandra, not Tom's boss, straight to the top. I included my original complaint, Sandra's response, and a detailed explanation of how I'd obtained the footage that HR claimed didn't exist. I also sent copies to corporate. Our company has a larger parent corporation with their own HR department and ethics hotline. I filed a formal complaint there too, attached all the evidence, and waited. Here's where it gets absurd. Within 48 hours, Tom was fired, not placed on leave, not moved to another department, fired, escorted out of the building by security. Sandra was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The CEO called me personally to apologize, said this was a serious breach of protocol and trust, that they were reviewing all of Sandra's recent cases to see if there were other instances of bias or misconduct. A week later, the company offered me a settlement, a significant one, along with a formal written apology. They also offered to pay for counseling if I needed it and assured me there would be no retaliation. I consulted a lawyer before accepting anything. She said the settlement was fair, probably more than I'd get if I sued, and that the company was clearly trying to make this right before it became a bigger legal issue. I accepted. But the real vindication came about a month later. After news of Tom's firing spread through the office, 3 other women came forward. They'd all experienced similar behavior from Tom. One of them had also reported him to Sandra and been told there wasn't enough evidence. Another had been too scared to report anything because she'd heard what happened to me initially. The third had filed a complaint 2 years ago that had mysteriously been dropped. Things went from bad to unhinged when all of this came to light. The company launched a full internal review. Sandra was fired. Tom is now facing multiple lawsuits, not just from former employees, but from the company itself for the liability he created. His name is out there now. Any future employer who Googles him is going to find articles about the harassment cases. His career in this industry is basically over. The part that still gets me is how close they came to getting away with it. If I hadn't pushed back, if I'd just accepted Sandra's dismissal and moved on, Tom would still be there, still harassing people, still protected by an HR director who valued their personal relationship over employee safety. And I'd be the one suffering in silence, probably looking for a new job, thinking I'd somehow brought this on myself. You almost have to admire the audacity, except you really don't. The sheer arrogance of thinking they could just delete the evidence and I'd go away quietly. That I wouldn't question the convenient technical failure, that I wouldn't fight back. I'm still at the company. They've implemented new policies, outside oversight for harassment complaints, mandatory training, a third-party hotline for reporting issues. The new HR director reached out to me personally to ask for feedback on how to rebuild trust. I appreciated that, even though I'm still pretty skeptical about HR in general now. The other women who came forward and I have stayed in touch. We've talked about the importance of documentation, of not accepting dismissive responses, of pushing back even when institutions fail us. Because they did fail us. The system that was supposed to protect us actively worked against us, and we only got justice because we refused to accept their version of reality. Tom's lawsuits are still ongoing. I heard through the grapevine that he's trying to settle, but at least one of the women is refusing. She wants her day in court, wants it on public record. I respect that. Sometimes people need to see consequences play out fully, need to know that there's accountability, even if it comes slowly. I don't know if I'd call this revenge exactly. It was more like survival, like refusing to be erased. They tried to make me doubt what I knew had happened, tried to make me feel like I was the problem. And when that didn't work, when the truth came out anyway, their whole house of cards collapsed. Justice feels sweet when the truth finally comes to light, but sometimes people take matters into their own hands when institutions fail them. Jen and I were both up for the same promotion, senior project manager, better pay, better hours, an actual office instead of a cubicle. We'd both been with the company for about the same amount of time, had similar performance reviews, and honestly, it could have gone either way. I knew it was going to be competitive, but I didn't think it would get ugly. I was wrong. For a few weeks, things seemed normal. We were both working extra hours trying to prove ourselves, but it felt like healthy competition. We'd even joke about it sometimes in the break room. Then things started getting weird. Small things at first. Files I needed for presentations would go missing from the shared drive. Emails I'd sent wouldn't show up in the system. My project timelines got mysteriously altered in the database. I thought maybe it was just tech issues, our system glitching out like it always did. But looking back, the pattern was pretty obvious. Then, one Monday morning, everything exploded. I got to work around 8 like usual, grabbed my coffee, sat down at my desk. 10 minutes later, our boss Martin called me into his office. His face was red, and he had that tight jaw thing he does when he's trying not to yell. He told me to close the door and sit down. He asked me where I was the night before around 11 p.m. I told him I was home, asleep, like any normal person on a Sunday night. He pulled up something on his computer and turned the monitor toward me. It was a keycard access log, my badge number, storage room, 11:03 p.m. I stared at it, confused. I told him I wasn't there, that I hadn't been in the office at all on Sunday. That's when he told me what happened. Expensive equipment had been stolen from the storage room. We're talking laptops, tablets, camera gear, thousands of dollars worth of stuff. And according to the logs, my keycard was used to access the room right around the time it happened. He asked me again where I was. I told him again I was home. He asked if I could prove it. I lived alone. No alibi, no witnesses. Just me saying I didn't do it while the log said I did. I tried to explain that someone must have cloned my card, that this had to be a setup. Martin looked at me like I was making excuses. He said the logs don't lie, that keycard cloning is pretty sophisticated and unlikely, and that I was being suspended pending investigation. Suspended. I'd never even gotten written up before, and now I was being suspended for theft I didn't commit. I went home in a daze, sat on my couch trying to figure out what was happening. Someone had my keycard information. Someone had access to that storage room at 11 p.m. on a Sunday. Someone wanted me to take the fall for this, and the only person who had anything to gain from me being out of the picture was Jen. I started thinking about the timing. The promotion decision was supposed to be announced this week. If I was suspended or fired over this, Jen would get the job by default. It was almost too convenient, but I needed proof. Accusing her without evidence would just make me look desperate and paranoid. Then I remembered something. I'd been at the office late Friday working on a presentation for a client meeting. I'd parked in the garage and didn't leave until around 9 p.m. Our parking garage has security cameras. If I could prove my car left at 9, and if someone else's car was there at 11 when my badge was supposedly used, that would at least show I wasn't the one who used it. I called our security company and requested footage from Friday night. Technically, I wasn't supposed to have access while suspended, but the security guy Jerry knew me and thought the whole thing was fishy anyway. He sent me a link to the footage. I spent hours scrubbing through it, watching cars come and go. There was my car, clearly visible, leaving the garage at 9:07 p.m., exactly when I said I left. But that wasn't even the worst part. At 11:03 p.m., right when my badge was supposedly used to access the storage room, Jen's car was there. Her distinctive blue Honda with the university parking sticker in the back window. She was at the office at 11 p.m. on a Sunday, the exact time the theft occurred. My hands were shaking. I requested footage from the hallway outside the storage room. Jerry sent it over, said he was curious now too, and wanted to see what was going on. I opened the file and there she was, Jen. Walking up to the storage room door at 11 p.m., she pulled out a keycard, swiped it, and the door opened. My keycard number, her hand. She'd cloned it somehow, maybe lifted it while I was in a meeting, or copied the information when I left my bag in the break room. However she did it, she'd planned this. The footage showed her making multiple trips, loading equipment into boxes, carrying them down the hall toward the parking garage. She was calm, methodical, like she'd rehearsed this. She even looked directly at the camera at one point and didn't flinch. She thought she was safe. Thought the logs would point to me and no one would bother checking the actual video footage. I downloaded everything, made copies, backed it up in 3 different places. Then I called Martin and told him I had evidence that proved my innocence. He was skeptical but agreed to meet me first thing Tuesday morning. I showed up to his office with my laptop and a USB drive. Jen was already at her desk when I walked in, and the look she gave me was almost smug, like she thought I was there to clear out my things or something. I walked past her without saying a word. Martin sat down and I pulled up the footage. Showed him my car leaving at 9 p.m. Showed him Jen's car arriving at 10:45 and staying until almost midnight. Then I showed him the hallway footage. Him watching Jen use my cloned keycard, load up equipment, and cart it away was almost satisfying. His expression went from skeptical to absolutely furious in about 30 seconds. Here's where it gets absurd. Martin called Jen into his office immediately. She walked in with this confused, innocent look, asked what was going on. Martin didn't say anything, just played the video. I watched her face as she realized what she was seeing. She went pale, started stammering, tried to say it wasn't what it looked like. Martin asked her to explain what it looked like then, since the footage seemed pretty clear. She tried to claim she was retrieving equipment for a project, that she had permission, that she'd used my card because hers wasn't working. Martin pointed out that the equipment was reported stolen, that she'd never mentioned having it, and that she'd deliberately framed me for theft. She switched tactics, started crying, said she was under a lot of pressure with the promotion, that she made a mistake, that she'd return everything. Martin told her she was fired effective immediately and that he was reporting her to the police for theft. She turned on me then, said I'd ruined her career out of jealousy, that I was vindictive and manipulative. I just sat there, didn't say a word. The footage spoke for itself. Security escorted her out that afternoon. She was arrested a few days later when they found most of the equipment in her apartment. Turns out she'd planned to sell it and claim the extra money would help her relocate for the promotion she thought she'd get once I was out of the way. I got the promotion. Martin apologized formally, said he should have looked into it more thoroughly before suspending me. The company even gave me back pay for the days I was suspended. Jen's facing criminal charges, and last I heard through the grapevine, she's telling anyone who will listen that I set her up, that I'm the real thief and I manipulated the footage somehow. The delusion is honestly impressive. The whole thing taught me that people will go to insane lengths when they want something badly enough. Jen could have just competed fairly. She was good at her job. She might have gotten the promotion on her own merit. Instead, she decided to commit actual crimes, frame a coworker, and destroy her own career in the process. And the worst part is, she still doesn't think she did anything wrong. In her mind, I'm the villain for having evidence of what she did. Sometimes the best revenge is just having security cameras and knowing how to request footage. Jen gave herself enough rope to hang herself. I just had to show people where to look. When workplace betrayal backfires spectacularly, it's almost poetic, but nothing compares to the moment when someone's carefully crafted lie unravels in front of an audience. Our CEO Richard was giving the presentation of his career. Millions of dollars on the line. Potential investors flown in from 3 different countries. The entire company was watching via internal live stream because Richard wanted everyone to see him close this deal. He'd been hyping it up for weeks, talking about how this funding round was going to change everything, how we were all going to be part of something huge. The energy in the office was electric. People were gathered around monitors, watching Richard work the room with his usual charisma. The presentation started off perfectly. Richard had this whole polished slideshow about our company's growth trajectory, our market position, our innovative products. He was in his element, gesturing confidently at graphs that showed nothing but upward momentum. The investors were nodding, taking notes, looking impressed. Everything was going exactly according to plan. About 20 minutes in, right as Richard was transitioning to the financial projection slide, his screen froze, just completely locked up mid-animation. You could see Richard's smile falter for a second. He made a joke about technology, tried to click to the next slide. Nothing happened. He looked off screen, probably at someone from IT, and kept talking, trying to fill the dead air while they figured out what was wrong. Then the screen glitched. Hard. The slideshow disappeared, and suddenly we were looking at Richard's desktop, his actual computer desktop, with all his files and folders visible. The IT guy was clearly trying to remote in and fix whatever was happening, but instead of fixing it, the screen switched again. This time to Richard's email inbox, his full, unfiltered, very much not meant for public viewing email inbox, projected on the screen behind him, broadcasting to the entire room of investors, streaming live to every employee in the company. For about 30 seconds, while Richard realized what was happening and started frantically signaling to cut the feed, we all just sat there staring at his emails. The subject lines were right there, clear as day, organized by date with the most recent ones at the top. Fake revenue numbers Q3. Covering up the audit, urgent. How to hide the layoffs from board. Investor deck, use inflated metrics. Falsifying customer data. The IT guy was scrambling. You could see the cursor moving around the screen, trying to close windows, but the system was completely frozen. Richard had turned around and seen what was displaying behind him. His face went white. He started yelling for someone to cut the feed, shut down the projector, do something. But it was too late, the damage was done. People in our office were already screenshotting. I watched it happen in real time. Someone from accounting grabbed their phone and started taking pictures of the screen. Someone from marketing did the same. By the time the stream finally cut and the projector went dark, probably 15 people had captured images of Richard's inbox. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The investors didn't wait around for an explanation. They got up and walked out. Just stood up, gathered their things, and left while Richard was still on stage trying to explain that this was a misunderstanding, that the emails were taken out of context, that someone must have hacked his account. Nobody was buying it. You could see it in their faces. They'd seen enough. Back in the office, chaos erupted. People were forwarding the screenshots to each other. Someone sent them to a company-wide Slack channel before IT could shut it down. Within minutes, every single employee had seen Richard's emails. We all knew. The fake revenue numbers, the inflated metrics he'd been feeding to investors, the plan to lay off 40% of staff immediately after securing funding. Everything he'd been hiding was now completely exposed because of a technical glitch during the worst possible moment. The emails painted a clear picture. Richard had been cooking the books for at least a year, maybe longer. He'd been inflating our company's performance to make us look more successful than we actually were. The customer numbers he'd been bragging about in meetings, fake. The revenue growth he'd shown in quarterly reports, manipulated. The audit that was supposed to have given us a clean bill of health, He'd actively worked to cover up discrepancies. And the layoffs. He'd been planning to fire nearly half the company the second he got investor money. We'd all been sitting in those company-wide meetings where he talked about growth and expansion and how we were all going to benefit from this funding round. Meanwhile, he had emails discussing which departments to gut, which positions to eliminate, how to structure the layoffs to avoid bad press. By that afternoon, the screenshots had made their way outside the company. Someone, I don't know who, sent them to a tech industry blog. By evening, they were everywhere. Twitter, LinkedIn, industry newsletters. Richard's face was plastered across articles with headlines about corporate fraud and deception. Our company's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. The board held an emergency meeting that night. By the next morning, Richard was done, forced to resign effective immediately. They released a statement about investigating the allegations, cooperating fully with authorities, taking the matter seriously, all the standard corporate crisis management language. But the damage was already catastrophic. Here's where it gets absurd. Federal investigators got involved. The SEC started looking into our financial reporting. Auditors descended on the office to comb through everything. Employees were being interviewed about what they knew and when they knew it. The whole company ground to a halt while investigators tried to figure out how deep the fraud went and who else might have been involved. Richard tried to claim he'd been set up, that someone had planted those emails to sabotage him, that the glitch was intentional, orchestrated by someone who wanted to destroy him. He hired lawyers, put out statements, did a couple of media interviews where he played the victim, but the evidence was overwhelming. The emails were real. The financial manipulations were real. Forensic accountants confirmed that the numbers had been cooked. There was no way to spin this. Several of our biggest clients pulled out. Partnerships dissolved. People started jumping ship, updating their LinkedIn profiles, and taking calls from recruiters. For a few weeks, it genuinely looked like the company might collapse entirely. Stock price in free fall, lawsuits piling up, regulators circling. Everything Richard had built or claimed to have built was crumbling. But then something unexpected happened. The board brought in a new CEO, someone from outside the company with a solid reputation and no connection to Richard's schemes. She came in and just started being honest. Brutally honest. She acknowledged the fraud, apologized to clients and employees, laid out a plan to rebuild with actual integrity. She brought in new financial leadership, opened up the books to outside audits, implemented new oversight structures. She didn't try to minimize what happened or make excuses. She just owned it and committed to fixing it. And slowly, things stabilized. Some clients came back. New investors, the kind who did actual due diligence, started showing interest. The regulatory investigation continued, but it was focused on Richard and a couple of his inner circle executives who'd been complicit. Most of the company was cleared. People stopped leaving. The stock price recovered somewhat. We weren't where we'd been before, but we were surviving. Richard, on the other hand, is facing fraud charges, multiple counts, civil suits from investors, potential prison time. His entire empire, built on inflated metrics and fake success, destroyed by a 30-second technical glitch that exposed emails he thought would never see the light of day. The whole situation is almost poetic in a dark way. Richard had been so careful, so meticulous about maintaining his facade. He'd had systems in place to keep everything hidden, but all it took was one frozen screen, one technical malfunction during a high-stakes presentation, and everything unraveled. 30 seconds. That's all it took to expose years of fraud and deception. I think about that sometimes. How much of our lives depends on technology working the way it's supposed to? How many secrets are one glitch away from being exposed? Richard probably never imagined that an IT failure during an investor presentation would be what brought him down. He was probably worried about whistleblowers or auditors or investigative journalists. He never considered that his own email inbox, displayed to hundreds of people because of a technical error, would be his downfall. The company survived. Richard didn't. And every single person who watched that presentation learned a valuable lesson about what happens when you build your success on lies. Eventually, the truth comes out, sometimes in the most unexpected, most public, most devastating way possible. Technology has a way of exposing the truth at the worst possible time, and our final story shows just how far someone will go when their double life is about to be revealed. Ms. Harper was a beloved high school English teacher. Young, probably late 20s, energetic, the kind of teacher who actually made you want to read the book she assigned. She'd do dramatic readings in class, bring in snacks for discussion days, stay after school to help students who were struggling. Everyone liked her. She was real. She cared. And in a school where half the teachers seemed like they were just counting down to retirement, that meant something. Then, one Monday morning, everything changed. I got to school early and noticed groups of students clustered together, whispering, showing each other their phones. By first period, the whole school knew. Someone had leaked that Ms. Harper had an OnlyFans account. I don't know who found it first or how it spread so fast, but by lunch, screenshots were everywhere. The school tried to crack down, threatened to confiscate phones, but it was too late. The information was out there. The initial reaction was pretty much what you'd expect. Some students thought it was hilarious, some were uncomfortable, some didn't care. But parents went absolutely nuclear. By the end of the day, the school board had received hundreds of emails and calls demanding Ms. Harper be fired immediately. There were parents organizing protests. Local news picked up the story. The principal sent out an email to all families saying they were aware of the situation and handling it appropriately. Ms. Harper didn't come to school Tuesday or Wednesday. Our substitute teacher wouldn't tell us anything, just handed out worksheets and avoided eye contact. Everyone assumed she'd been fired or suspended. The rumors got wilder by the day. Some people said she'd quit. Others said she was suing the school. A few students started a petition to reinstate her, arguing that what she did in her personal time was her business, and teacher salaries were so low she probably needed the extra income. Then came the breaking point. A senior named Marcus was scrolling through some of the leaked content, probably more out of morbid curiosity than anything else, when he noticed something in the background of one of the photos. He zoomed in and posted a screenshot to the school's unofficial Reddit page. The posters on the wall behind Miss Harper looked familiar. Really familiar, because they were the same posters that had been hanging in her classroom all year. The banned books collage, the Shakespeare quote banner, the student-made projects from last semester. People started analyzing other photos. In one, you could see the corner of her desk, the same desk we sat next to every day. In another, there were books visible on a shelf in the background. Someone recognized the spines. They were books from our school library, specific editions that had the school district's label on them. And then someone found a photo where you could see part of a whiteboard in the background, with a half-erased lesson plan still visible. The same lesson plan we'd seen in class the week before. Ms. Harper hadn't just been running an OnlyFans account. She'd been filming content in our classroom, in the same room where we had class every day, using school property as her set. The reaction to that revelation was immediate and intense. Parents who'd been defending her right to a side job immediately flipped. This wasn't about her personal life anymore. This was about her using school property, a space meant for minors, to create adult content. The school board held an emergency meeting. The district launched a full investigation, and the story went from local controversy to national news practically overnight. Security footage confirmed what everyone had already figured out. Ms. Harper had been staying late almost every Friday for over a year. She'd wait until the building was mostly empty, lock her classroom door, close the blinds, and film for hours. Sometimes she'd stay until 10 or 11 at night. The footage showed her bringing in costume changes, props, lighting equipment. She had a whole system, and she'd been doing it right under everyone's noses. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The school district fired her immediately, but they also pressed charges. Misuse of school property, creating adult content in a space regularly occupied by minors. There were questions about whether students could be considered victims, since they'd unknowingly been in the same physical space used for this content. Lawyers got involved. It became this massive legal mess. The classroom got completely renovated. They repainted the walls, replaced the furniture, took down all the decorations, got new books. It was like they were trying to erase any evidence that the old classroom had existed. Students weren't allowed in during the renovation. When we finally came back, it looked like a completely different room. Generic beige walls, basic desks, nothing personal. The new teacher they assigned was some retired guy who just played documentaries and gave us packets. Nobody talked about Ms. Harper anymore. At least not out loud. But the damage was done. Ms. Harper's reputation was destroyed. Her teaching license was revoked. She's facing potential criminal charges that could result in jail time. Her face and name are forever associated with this scandal. A quick Google search brings up dozens of articles, think pieces, social media debates. Some people still defend her, argue that she was a victim of circumstance and low teacher pay. Others say she crossed an unforgivable line by involving the school. Students were divided too. Some of her former students started a fundraiser to help with her legal fees, saying she'd been a great teacher who made a mistake. Others felt violated, like the classroom they'd sat in every day had been contaminated. There were students who couldn't shake the feeling that they'd been unknowingly part of something inappropriate, that sitting at those desks, touching that furniture, being in that space meant something different now. Parents were horrified across the board. There were demands for the principal to resign for not noticing what was happening, questions about how security protocols could have failed so badly, calls for stricter oversight of teacher activities after hours. The whole district implemented new policies about building access, security camera monitoring, and teacher conduct. The weirdest part was how quickly it all unraveled. One week, Ms. Harper was everyone's favorite teacher. The next week, she was unemployed and facing criminal charges. One leaked account led to scrutinized photos, which led to recognizing backgrounds, which led to a full investigation that exposed a year plus of behavior nobody had suspected. Looking back, there were probably signs people missed. The fact that she always stayed late on Fridays, that she was weirdly protective of her classroom space, that she had professional-looking ring lights and camera equipment she claimed were for student projects that never quite materialized. But nobody connected the dots because why would they? Teachers stay late all the time. Lots of people have camera equipment. It seemed normal until suddenly it very much wasn't. The legal case is still ongoing. Ms. Harper's lawyer is arguing that she didn't technically break any laws because the content was created after school hours in a space she had legitimate access to. Prosecutors are arguing that using school property for commercial adult content, regardless of timing, constitutes misuse and creates a hostile environment. Legal experts are split on how it'll play out. Imagine being this confidently wrong about what you could get away with. Like she genuinely thought she could use her classroom as a filming location indefinitely, and nobody would ever notice or care. The hubris is almost impressive in its complete lack of awareness. I don't know what'll happen to her ultimately. Maybe she'll avoid jail time and just have to live with the public humiliation and destroyed career. Maybe she'll face serious criminal consequences. Either way, her life as she knew it is over, and the school, the students, the parents, we're all left trying to process what happened and what it means. Some students still feel bad for her. They point out that teachers are underpaid and overworked, that she was trying to survive in a system that doesn't value educators. Others argue that plenty of teachers struggle financially and don't turn their classrooms into adult film sets. Both things can be true, I guess. The system can be broken and someone can still make inexcusable choices within that broken system. The classroom renovation is complete now. Everything's been replaced. It's like Ms. Harper was never there. But everyone who was in her class will always remember. Will always know what that space was used for. Will always have that weird, uncomfortable feeling associated with a place that was supposed to be safe and educational. If you've made it this far into the chaos, thank you for riding this emotional roller coaster with me. These stories remind us that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. Whether it's through a glitching screen, a hidden camera, or a DNA test nobody saw coming, secrets don't stay secret forever. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, the truth might hurt, but living a lie hurts everyone eventually. See you in the next one, and may your own life be far less dramatic than the stories we cover here. Sleep well.